This story begins with a girl refusing a lord's request to become his personal trainer. The man is clearly dissatisfied with this answer and turns his gaze to his interlocutor. Meanwhile, our heroine is waiting to see what the milord's reaction will be. At this point, the man puts his mug of tea on the table and asks the reason for the refusal. He thinks that the price for his request seemed too low to the girl. However, even if she was not satisfied with the conditions, everything could be fixed. The man promises that he is ready to reconsider everything for this girl. The Duke's sincere face and voice make our heroine think. If this were a webtoon or a novel, the man would definitely be its main character. The girl became the first trainer to whom Kazan did not react aggressively. But our heroine still doesn't understand what kind of world she found herself in. After this, the girl confidently declares that she cannot agree to become a trainer, as she strives for a quiet life. 5 years ago, our heroine began to remember her past life. The current world reminded her of a novel she had once read. But reality has not changed, and the girl remains an ordinary orphan with nothing special about her. Then she met a kind headmistress who became like a mother to her and grew up with wonderful younger brothers and sisters. Now, exactly 5 years have passed since she remembered everything. One day, the girl loaded a cart filled with various foods. After that, she drove her along the road to deliver her to the right place. The thing is that our heroine works as a trainer at a dragon training center. After a while, she comes to the bars where her beauty named Lu is located. This is a truly incredible white dragon, like something out of a fantasy world. In her past life, the girl adored magical creatures from such worlds. Sometimes they are raised as livestock, and sometimes they are used as fighting force or beloved pets. In this world, dragons play a variety of roles, and the girl works as their trainer. Although she is very happy about this, not all dragons are docile creatures. Some breathe fire, while others fly through the sky or live in the ocean depths. With such force, these creatures can destroy an entire building like a cardboard house. And if people want dragons to live in peace, then they need to be trained. After some time, our heroine cleans her dragon's home until it shines. After this, she is finally ready to pay attention to her pet. However, Lu turns away from the girl and shows his resentment. But our heroine doesn't give up and says that she has some goodies. At this moment, the dragon's ears perk up to the most desired word, and the girl adds that she just wanted to clean up and then treat Lu. After this, she decides to look out of the corner of her eye at the magical creature's reaction. At this moment, Lu is already lying at our heroine's feet and whining quietly. The girl's heart is ready to break from how cute it looks. Afterwards, she gives Lu a treat and tells her that she deserves it for her patience. The dragon is very happy. The cleaning is done, and now all that remains is to give the pet its daily ration. The girl is very happy to see Lu in such a cheerful mood today. Now you can't even tell that at first the dragon completely refused to eat. After this, it is necessary to check how well Lu tolerates horse riding training. Suddenly, Coach Lataya hears someone excitedly trying to reach her. The girl sees in front of her a young man who is trying to catch his breath after a great rush. At this moment, tears begin to flow from his eyes, and he asks for help. Coach Thompson's rock-type dragon has gone out of control. These creatures are covered with hard, stone-like scales, and are usually calm. Also, on the backs of such dragons grow shaggy plants that look like soft pillows. But now, the stone-type dragon clearly does not look like a slow and calm creature. His stern attitude frightens Coach Thompson to death. The man flatly refuses to approach the enraged machine, despite his friend's persuasion. Suddenly, another dragon appears behind them, who flew in with his mistress. Lithia gets off her pet and sets out to sort out the situation. And while the men argue about why they shouldn't have invited this woman here, the girl takes note of the details. According to his friend, since Thompson cannot cope with his dragon on his own, someone should help him. The man is enraged by these words, but Lydia asks him to be quiet and not make the situation worse. The girl falls under Thompson's hot hand, and he grabs her by the breasts. However, our heroine is not one to be timid, and decides to ask if the man can handle his dragon on his own. If he can do this, she will happily return to her business. But Thompson has nothing to say in response, since he only has the courage to raise his hand against girls. Suddenly, the stone dragon begins to roar angrily and stands up on its hind legs. Everyone instantly freezes in place, and Lytia notices the danger. At this moment, the dragon places its paws on the ground, after which it trembles. Meanwhile, the creature continues to growl furiously and show everyone its huge fangs. Lithia decides to take a desperate step and stands right in front of the enraged creature. The girl holds a treat in her hands and tries to calm the dragon with kind words. The creature cautiously approaches the stranger, and she says that she does not intend to harm her. Suddenly, a tasty treat falls to the ground right in front of the dragon's paw. Lithia freezes in place and watches the creature's reaction intently. At this moment, the dragon calms down and leans his muzzle against the girl. Lithia begins to pet Thompson's pet and promises to help her. The girl says that now she will remove from the dragon what is causing pain. As she thought, a growth appeared on the creature's back, which torments the animal. Meanwhile, grown men never cease to be amazed by the courage of the fragile girl. Lithia climbed onto the dragon's back and was diligently trying to remove the foreign object from it. Suddenly, in pain, the dragon throws the girl off himself and she falls to the ground. The men immediately run to Lydia and hope that she is okay. In her hand, she holds a giant sungrass seed that needs to be removed regularly. Thompson didn't expect that poor animal care could have such an impact. After this, he immediately calls his student Rick to him to scold him. Thompson doesn't skimp on punishments and hits the poor young man for poor care of his pet. The man is in a great rage, and even the boy's apologies do not calm him down. Fortunately, Lydia stands up for the student and informs him that he can make mistakes under the guidance of a mentor. But how is it that Rick doesn't even know the basic rules of dragon care? Thompson understands what the girl is hinting at, and this makes him even more furious. But the one who ignored such a basic mistake and put on a saddle provoked the dragon's rampage, and the only person to blame in this situation is Thompson. The man even blushes from the anger that the girl's accusations caused in him. But he is not the only person who experiences negative emotions towards the girl. The director of the training center doesn't understand what Lydia was even thinking. However, Lydia does not see her guilt in stopping the maddened dragon, and if the appointed coach is present, then the intervention of another coach is a normal reaction. But the whole point is that Thompson has the influential Count Harrison behind him. He is one of the largest sponsors of Asher, and Lydia should watch his words to avoid losing his job. The girl should also think very carefully about an orphanage. All this time, the director tolerated his employee's behavior only because she was good at her job. And there's no need to remind her whose recommendation she'll need when she decides to leave there. Of course, Lydia is very angry about such injustice, which she can't influence in any way. Even despite the memories of a past life, there was not much difference with this world. In any case, for our heroine, reality remains reality. She only knew how to train dragons, and was lucky enough to get a job at the Asher Government Center. At this moment, the girl overhears Thompson talking about how he doubts her talent. He believes that Lydia simply chooses obedient dragons and presents it as a merit. Who knows, maybe she uses her looks to charm clients. Lydia hates to hear all this, but she thinks about the children at the orphanage, for whose sake she holds on to this position. Meanwhile, Count Olbart is amazed at how well Lou obeys the girl. However, the dragon does not show reciprocal love towards the man himself. Lydia advises spending a couple more days here to work on restoring the Count's connection with Lou. Olbart decides to listen to the advice and regrets that he will not be able to devote himself entirely to this matter. But the Count is very glad that Lou has been looked after very well all this time, and he is even ready to give the girl anything, if only she would become their family's personal trainer. Lydia thanks Olbart, but is forced to refuse such an offer. She wants to gain more skills at the Asher Center and work here longer. At this moment, Lou, for some reason, looks at the sky with apprehension and tenses up. The dragon suddenly begins to show aggression, although just a minute ago, everything was calm. At this moment, Lydia notices that the air around her begins to sway because it has become too warm. The girl decides to hold back her dragon and calms her down a little. Previously, our heroine had only heard rumors about such a phenomenon. If this is the same type of dragon that always chose one noble family, then it is an extremely rare breed. And judging by the creature that the girl saw, it belongs to Duke Albrant. Even the director of the training center trembles in front of this influential man. The Duke decided to take a look at Asher himself, which is the best center in the empire. And while Albrant is studying the papers, the director, in a trembling voice, announces that their center really does show the best results. But if this is really the case, then the Duke would like to entrust them with the training of the dragon. The director is very happy and assumes that he will have to train creatures for the family's chivalry. However, the Duke explains that his personal dragon will have to be trained, and the director's expression changes. But he can't directly refuse such an influential person. And the Duke explains that he is looking for a person worthy of becoming a personal trainer for the Agrix dragon. However, the director believes that the pet may develop an aversion to human trainers. Moreover, it may turn out that no one except the Duke himself is suitable for this role. And Albrandt reports that the director's concerns on this matter are unfounded. After this, the Duke boldly crumples the papers lying on the desk of the office owner. He then explains that the decision will certainly not be made by the director himself. Meanwhile, one student informs Lichia that they were called by personal order from the principal. The girl is surprised by the strange commotion around her. Then she turns her gaze to the Count and the dragon, who is already showing more reciprocity towards his master. But, unfortunately, Lydia is forced to urgently stop training. The director called all the coaches because of the arrival of Duke Albrandt. In this case, the Count is ready to obey the coach and stop training. The girl advises him to prepare treats for the dragon next time and promises to give him the recipe. After this, the Count thanks Lichia and says goodbye to Coach Liu. Now the girl is free from work and wonders where she needs to go. At this time, many people had already gathered on the first training field. Lichia arrives last and gives the reason why she didn't make it in time. Suddenly, the girl freezes at the sight of the man she sees in front of her. It turns out to be the very same Duke Albrandt, because of whom all this commotion started. But something about him makes the girl very wary and causes distrust. At this moment, Lichia decides to go into the crowd and meets her friends there. And the director finally announces that the Duke plans to find a trainer for his dragon. All the trainers start whispering, as this is something that the ducal family's personal trainer should be doing. But the director demands to stop the discussion, since this is not mandatory participation. Only those who are confident in their abilities and can handle the Agrix dragon can become trainers. However, these creatures only select members of the Albrandt genus, and almost nothing is known about them. Therefore, people do not know what can anger the Agrix and whose wrath no human body can withstand. But Lichia is very interested to know why the Duke wants to entrust the training to another trainer and decides to volunteer for this role. At this moment, other coaches join in her courage, raising their hands up. This is a great opportunity, but Lydia is still afraid of life away from the capital. Suddenly, Thompson approaches her and mocks her fear. Although the girl pretended to be brave at first, something made her hesitate after that. At this time, our heroine's friend pushes away the impudent Thompson, who is a master of nothing but talking nonsense. The man is furious again and ready to fight, although he was unable to cope even with the stone dragon and was demoted to a student. Lichia decides to intervene in the pleasant conversation of her acquaintances and asks them to stop. After all, right now the director of the training center is watching their argument. Thompson decides to leave and says that the girl is lucky this time, and Lydia's friend knows that she only gave up because of the shelter. Although she understands the girl's situation, such a chance only comes once in a lifetime. Even the headmistress would have scolded her charge for refusing such an opportunity. Meanwhile, all the trainers are given a draw to determine which team they will approach the dragon. Lithia remains on the sidelines at this point, preferring to maintain her quiet life. Under no circumstances should you interfere in the situation, especially if it concerns a person who resembles the hero of the novel. Once you get confused in such a story, a series of misfortunes will immediately begin. But since Lydia didn't submit an application, this won't affect her, and other coaches will have to sort everything out. And at this time, they cannot even come close to the fire-breathing dragon. Even the director fell victim to the dragon's tail and fell to the ground. At this point, Lichia realizes that things are going worse than she expected, and the dragon even enjoys mocking everyone who approaches him. Our heroine helps her friend clean the soot from her face and tells her that the Agrix will be difficult to tame, but she suggests making a pause of silence for whoever gets caught. Suddenly, a smug Thompson comes out to meet the dragon. He carefully approaches Agrix as he settles comfortably into the square. Lithia notices the danger and hopes that Thompson is not such an idiot. However, he still touches the animal, which is outraged by such impudence. But foolish Thompson thinks he passed this test very easily. Lichia understands that if she doesn't manage to help the man, this will be the last thing he will be able to say. At that moment, the dragon's sharp claws were already bending over Thompson's head. The animal grabs the impudent braggart with its paw and pins him to the ground. Under such pressure, Thompson cannot escape the fiery flames. Out of panic, the man starts screaming and begging for mercy. At this moment, Lydia takes out a small tube and begins to blow into it. After this, the dragon becomes distracted and switches its attention to the sound. Lithia hurries to Thompson and asks her friend to prepare magical tools. Meanwhile, the man begs to do something and save him. Our heroine doesn't understand why she didn't just stand there and watch this idiot die. In the end, for some reason, she decided to save the man who insulted her in every possible way. The girl decides to talk to the dragon and promises not to come closer without his permission. Watching him from the side, she realized how smart this pet was. First, Lydia will sort out this mess, and then she will force the director to fire this idiot under threat of her own resignation. Although the dragon looks irritated, he still gives a gentle warning and does not show unnecessary aggression. Therefore, Lydia patiently waits for the animal to calm down. After this, she slowly retreats, taking a few steps back. At this moment, the dragon sharply hits the ground with its paw and begins to roar. The animal becomes aggressive again and rushes towards its prey. Lithia realizes that she was hasty and caused such a reaction in the dragon. Her friend is terrified of what is about to happen to the girl. Even the dragon's owner doesn't have time to react to his pet's attack. But at this moment, something unexpected happens, and the Agrix, who is terrifying everyone, becomes cuter than a puppy. He begins to lick Lydia and show tender feelings towards her. It is impossible to list the number of questions that this picture raised in those around me. Even the Duke himself did not expect to see such love and his dragon. After this, Albrecht reprimands the director for Thompson's incompetence. After all, what trainer would approach a dragon without monitoring its reactions? And while the director hesitates and chooses his words, the Duke decides to end the conversation. However, he will not leave it at that and promises to return to this issue later. Then, he decides to approach the girl who saved the stupid coach. Lydia notices Albrecht and decides to take a break from making out with the dragon. The Duke asks the girl's name, and she introduces herself to him. The man reports that Lydia's act was very impressive. She was the only one who followed protocol on that site. After seeing this, the Duke offers Lydia to take over Kazen's training, but she never even thought about becoming the Duke's personal trainer. It was from this moment of refusal that the story of our heroine began. And it's not at all that the girl is not satisfied with the price or conditions. After all, then she would have applied herself when the opportunity arose. From the very beginning, Lydia did not sign up for the exam and only intervened because of a mistake by her colleague. Although the director will be angry, the girl still cannot leave the shelter that is dear to her. What's more important to her is easing the director's burden and allowing the younger children to live without fear. This is the path that Lydia chose, and for her it is more important than anything else in the world. Therefore, the girl asks the Duke for forgiveness and says that she will not be able to leave the center of Usher. After Lydia leaves, Albrecht tries to understand the reason for her refusal. He finds it strange that someone would pass up the chance to be associated with the Duke and tame a rare Agrix dragon. But will Albrecht be able to find another coach who won't be pushed away by Kazan? At this moment, the Duke hears a knock on the door and gives permission to enter. The director walks inside and hands the Duke a stack of papers. While Albrecht studies the documents, the man hesitates and prepares to start a conversation. He decides to clarify that Lydia's coaching skills raise many questions. After all, she had never worked with the dragons of the Ashur Empire's nobles before. The girl mainly trains dragons abandoned by foreigners with limited funds. If it weren't for Count Harrison's funding, they would have valued Lydia much more. And now, thanks to Thompson's failure, there is a chance to get rid of this loser. At this point, the Duke explains that there is no point in qualifications if the dragon rejects the human. And if the director is so concerned about Lydia's competence, then he can try to deal with Kazan himself. But remembering his fall from the dragon's tail, the director is not particularly keen on repeating it a second time. At this point, the Duke sees in her personal file that Lydia is tied to the center due to her status as an orphan. He immediately jumps up and tells the director that they are finishing here. At the same time, Albrecht explains that he intends to leave Kazan in the center. After all, there is a man here who is capable of dealing with his dragon. After this conversation, the director decides to tell Lydia about everything. The girl is very surprised by the fact that the Duke handed over the Agrix dragon to the Ashur Center. In her opinion, Albrecht was simply crazy to decide to do such a thing. Moreover, Lydia is already overloaded with work, and she simply can't handle another dragon. However, it is unlikely that anyone else will be able to cope with the powerful Agrix. The director also explains that Litia will only need to feed the animal and provide it with basic care. And the girl is indignant because now she has to clean up the mess Thompson made. It would have been better if she hadn't interfered at all and let Agrix crush his skull. Lydia's nerves are completely unbearable, and she takes out a resignation letter. However, the director asks her to think about the dragons who will lose their beloved trainer. A man hits a girl where it hurts, and her heart begins to break into pieces. After all, if she really quits, what will happen to the other pets? The girl became too attached to the dragons, and now she cannot leave them. Even despite the situation she found herself in, she did not want to part with her beloved pets. Therefore, she decides to give in to the director's persuasion and agrees to stay. But Litia only plans to feed, walk, and clean the Agrix dragon without resorting to training. All her work will consist of basic care, and she will never become a personal trainer. After some time, the girl approaches the enclosure where the new animal is located. Lithia brings him food and goes inside the cage with the dangerous dragon. She had already become very tired during the whole day, but even at this moment she was thinking about the state of the Agrix. The change of scenery must have been difficult for Kazan, and Lydia promises to take good care of him. But at that very second, the animal jumps out of the corner and pounces on the food. However, Lithia abruptly stops the dragon, and he even freezes in place from indignation. Never before had a person stopped him before eating, so Kazan decides to show Lithia who's really in charge here. But our heroine does not give in, and still does not give permission to touch the food. With a confident gesture, she indicates to the dragon that he should stand still. Kazan decides to obey, although a lot of questions arise in his head, and Litia feels herself beginning to lose her guard from the dragon's cuteness. After this, she finally allows him to touch the food, and Kazan begins to devour it. Our heroine understands that the dragon is used to good things, and no one has treated him like this before. Although her duties are limited to caring for the dragon, her hands are itching to train him, but Litia tries in every possible way to drive these thoughts away from herself. And after Kazan has finished his meal, the girl offers him one more activity. Litia harnesses the dragon and decides to take a little walk with him. But at this moment, Kazan decides to show the girl his character once again. He rolls over onto his back and prevents the trainer from mounting him. However, Litia does not give in to provocation and still restrains herself. Despite the dragon's behavior, which requires training, she is determined to only feed and care for him. But it is very difficult to resist one's desire, and Litia can barely hold on. At this moment, she pulls on the reins and looks the dragon straight in the eyes. The girl clearly and confidently explains that Kazan should not behave like this. Meanwhile, the Duke watches Litia's efforts from the sidelines. As he expected, the girl did not keep him waiting and began to look after his pet. Kazan sees his master and begins to grumble at him with displeasure. Albrant apologizes to his pet, as he was a little late, and Litia didn't even think that the Duke was capable of showing such tender expressions on his face. After this, the man decides to ask how things went with Kazan. The girl explains that she only does care, and there have been no problems with that. After all, it's not every day you get the chance to care for an Agrix dragon. But Albrant is still surprised that a woman could earn the favor of his dragon. After all, not many girls can handle large-sized entities. Although for Albrant, what is more important is that his dragon finally accepted the trainer, but Litia still has no intention of becoming the appointed trainer, despite the Duke's persistent gaze. After this, the man decides to come closer to our heroine. Then he says that the girl can change her mind at any moment. From excitement, beads of sweat even appear on her face, and her tongue goes numb. Meanwhile, Albrant reports that he hopes for Litia's continued care for his pet. The girl promises that she will do everything possible for Kazan, since he is under her responsibility. At this point, the Duke announces that he will see how long Lithia can resist, and our heroine begins to think that the Duke's voice sounds like that of an obsessed lover. Some time ago, she sent letters to all the training centers. The girl had to wait a long time for someone to answer her. But to be honest, no one was ready to sympathize with Litia. All the colleagues she asked for help with feeding simply ran away. As a result, the girl was left completely alone with a huge pile of work. The next day, she harnesses the Count's dragon and hands him the pet. Today is Olbart's last day here, after which he will return to his homeland. The man is very sorry that Litia did not accept his offer and remains in the center. Moreover, she received her trainer's license at a young age with the highest score. Most of the owners who want serious training for their dragons are nobility and elite. For them, animals play a decisive role in the struggle for inheritance. But due to the director's interference, Lydia is constantly assigned external tasks. However, she is still glad that she can be near dragons. After all, there are few places where you can work with so many unique creatures. At this point, Count Ulbert informs her that the girl has no ambitions at all. However, this would not harm her at all, and the man hands Lydia a package. Finally, the Count adds that fish do not survive in water that is too clean. The girl loved dragons so much that she gritted her teeth and got a license, and then she came to the Asher Training Center and was able to see all the creatures she wanted. After this, our heroine unwraps the package from the Count and sees a precious stone in it. Maybe if she sells it, the money will be enough to hire a priest. At this moment, the Duke quietly sneaks up behind the girl and scares her. Lydia immediately puts the stone back into the package and greets the man. However, what she sees next doesn't match her imagination. After all, the Duke somehow found her mother superior and brought her to the center. Although the girl is very happy to see the head of the shelter, a lot of questions still arise in her head. At this point, Albrecht decides to leave the women alone and goes to Kazan. And the headmistress gently takes Lydia's hands in hers and says her name. The woman then says that she would like to discuss something with our heroine. A short time later, the ladies find themselves in the guest room, enjoying a cup of tea. There is an awkward silence in the room, and the conversation just can't get going. Lydia begins to worry that something has happened to her mother. The head of the shelter is no longer young and is often worried about health problems. But Mother came here to ask Lydia about the Agrix dragon. The girl is surprised by the topic of their conversation and replies that it is very dark red. Even when the dragon is completely still, it seems to emit a reddish glow. The light probably plays along the curves of the scales, and Mother would also be impressed by this sight. After all, this is one of the most beautiful dragons that Lydia has ever seen. After such a detailed description, the mother understands that Kazan is very dear to the girl. That is why she decides to offer Lydia something that she cannot agree to. Mother wants our heroine to become Duke Albrecht's dragon trainer. Lydia is very surprised and does not understand why the woman is asking her about this. It turns out that a certain outstanding trainer was able to calm the Duke's dragon. After this, Albrecht came to the shelter and made a large donation, and also brought a priest with him. Fortunately, this priest volunteered to help children in need of treatment. He also examined the abbess herself, who was very seriously ill. However, Mother hides her true condition from Lydia, but with the help of the Duke, she was able to reach the center safely. At that moment, our heroine finally felt relief. Lydia is incredibly happy that the abbess can now be cured. Therefore, the woman asks not to worry about her, and to take advantage of the chance that the Duke has given. After all this time, the girl worked so hard that her hands became rough. And this is undeniable proof of Lydia's efforts and dedication. Mother always felt guilty that the girl could not fly higher because of the orphanage. But all this time, Lydia was the abbess's personal pride. Meanwhile, the Duke and his dragon are relaxing peacefully in the sun. Suddenly, Kazan opens his eyes as he senses a person approaching. Albrecht notices Lydia in front of him and becomes interested in her conversation with the abbess. Although the girl was not entirely happy, thanks to the Duke, she was able to see her mother. After this, Lydia says that she has thought about the man's proposal, but he claims he has no idea what the proposal is. Lydia can't believe that the Duke has now decided to back down. She is very sorry that after so much effort, the man forgot about his own proposal. In that case, Albrecht will be able to find another trainer. However, noticing the girl's mood, the Duke says that he was only joking, and if she really has changed her mind, then that only makes him happy. After this, Albrecht invites the girl to discuss all the details, and Lydia is only too happy to take advantage of such a unique opportunity. After some time, the girl decides to say goodbye to her brothers and sisters. She asks the children not to cry and promises to visit them someday. After signing the contract with the Duke, time flew by. And so the day came when it was time for Lydia to go to the Albrecht house. The girl says goodbye to her mother and promises to write her letters. But suddenly, someone else comes to say goodbye to our heroine. This person turns out to be Melissa, who is the center's trainer. Lydia was very pleased that her colleagues also came to see her off, and Melissa breaks the news that the Duke filed a complaint against Thompson and that he was subsequently fired. This event can be considered a real farewell gift for Litya. After this, the girl leaves, and everyone wishes her success in her new place. Now that she is leaving, she is overcome with both light and bitter feelings. Meanwhile, the Duke was already tired of waiting for his coach and noticed that she was late. The girl apologizes and explains that she was simply saying goodbye to loved ones. But Albrecht created such contract conditions for Litya that she would be able to come home often anyway. However, in this contract, the girl must help Kazan fit into the duchy's dragon squad. Apparently, the problem is in adaptation. Although the Duke himself has good contact with the dragon, Litya would even boldly say that in this regard, everything is perfect for them. This is explained by the fact that the man always found time for his pet. At this point, Lydia begins to be confused by another part of the agreement. In it, the trainer can apply additional training, for which he is entitled to a bonus. And Albrecht explains that the trainer knows the dragon's condition best, and if Lydia notices anything, he'll make sure she gets paid properly. And our heroine feels as if the Duke is sure that she must discover something, but she decides to discuss the issue of payment later, when the need arises. In any case, the contract has already been signed, and our heroine has a chance to prove herself. At this time, the girl notices amazing views on the Duke's property. This environment is an ideal place for raising dragons. However, one of the trainers asks the girl to calm down her excitement. He explains that everything here is not so rosy. Even if Kazan recognized Litya, the girl is confused by these words, but the man promises that she will understand everything herself a little later. After this, our heroine's mood drops due to the created atmosphere. After all, these trainers don't exactly exude friendliness and hospitality. This is probably a natural reaction to a person who took someone else's dragon for training. Litya also heard that, quite recently, there was real chaos in the East. She clearly doesn't know a lot yet, and it won't be easy to fit into the team. But still, it is the Duchy of Albrecht, whose status comes immediately after the Emperor. With such a huge territory, there must be plenty of dragons and trainers here. Litya is already curious about what amazing dragons she will meet. However, our heroine's expectations do not coincide with reality at all. After all, there is not a single dragon, much less a trainer, in the duchy. The whole point is that Kazan gets out of control around other animals. After this, the trainers leave the girl, as if escaping from this place. She asks the man to wait, but he can no longer hear her. The whole situation and the behavior of the trainers seems strange to the girl. She even begins to think that these are not real coaches at all. After all, trainers are created to work with complex dragons and not run away from it. But in this case, she had to deal with ordinary panties. After this, the girl invites Kazan to go inside the house. But the dragon is reluctant to go anywhere, and Litya understands that he is terribly picky about everything. After all, it doesn't look like Kazan is being intentionally mischievous right now. Most likely he doesn't understand a lot of things, and Lydia decides to calm him down. The girl promises that the Duke will return soon, and the dragon should wait inside. Today is their first lesson, so Kazan should be patient. After this, our heroine goes to the house, where she meets the Duke's servants. The girl is incredibly angry about what she saw in this place. At this time, the Duke's assistant reports that trainers are quitting en masse. Even just filling the gaps after the title transfer proved extremely difficult. But the Duke is confident that the main problem lies with the trainers themselves. Getting rid of Julius Albrecht and his wife was necessary. This is the man who broke into the house and tried to take everything from the young Duke after the death of his parents. Noble families treated their personal trainers as close associates, and in families with rare dragon types, like Kazan, the status of a trainer was even higher. But now, these irreplaceable people have disappeared after Julius's betrayal. However, Albrecht could not even imagine that his uncle would kill them all. At this point, Secretary Pascal asks if the Duke has found a new trainer. The man decides not to reveal all the details, and only says that it will be something interesting. But Pascal asks to tell him at least some details about this man, and the Duke explains that Kazan behaves kindly around this trainer. The secretary is extremely surprised by this news, and cannot believe that this dragon was crawling at someone's feet. The Kazan is the type of animal that will not show itself for years to a person who does not meet its standard. It's hard to believe that such a picky dragon can be someone's sweet pet. At this moment, their conversation is interrupted by Litya, who bursts into the office with a roar. The girl is extremely indignant and demands an explanation from the Duke. She has such a wild desire to know the answers to her questions that everything inside her is like a fire burning. At this time, the Duke announces that the girl must now take care of the dragon and train him. And Lydia slams her hands on the table and explains that this is exactly why she is here. And first of all, she would like to know if Kazan had always lived alone. The Duke replies that indeed the dragon has been alone since childhood. After this, Lydia decides to clarify the goals of training the animal. The main task is to remove Kazan's aggression towards other dragons and teach him to accept food from strangers. In this case, the girl demands that the dragon be transferred immediately. This is necessary so that Kazan learns to feel comfortable around other dragons. Previously, he simply did not have the opportunity to communicate with other individuals, and that is why he became like this. And if we continue to isolate Kazan, it will become a big problem in the future. Although the Duke finds this decision difficult, he still decides to trust Lydia. In this case, the coach takes full responsibility for it. And if something goes wrong during training, Lydia will be the one to blame. But our heroine is not one to be timid and is ready to do this for Kazan. However, before this, the dragon should undergo basic obedience training. Albrecht gives his consent to the girl and asks her to handle it within a week. This time is enough to prepare the new enclosure before moving the dragon. And the Duke hopes that Lydia is not one of those fools who fail the first task. And at that moment, our heroine notices an expression on his face as if no one had ever told him that about the dragon before. Apparently, the previous trainers were too busy flattering and were not telling the truth. And now, Lydia is determined to achieve results in training with Kazan. Unfortunately, there was no one to help her in this matter. When other trainers see the girl, they shudder even from afar. On their part, such blatant avoidance looks very rude. Although Lydia herself was so busy that she did not have time to talk to anyone. After this, she throws away her finished apple and prepares for the exciting moment. After all, today is the very day when the results of training with the dragon will be tested. Up to this point, our heroine had worked hard to gain Kazan's obedience. Although the public performance looks stupid, Lydia still cannot deny herself such pleasure. She made a promise, and now she must show the employer what he wants to see. Meanwhile, the assistant coaches are already lining up the excited dragons. Albrecht spots Kazan in the sky and prepares to see the results of his training. All this time, the Duke did not see his pet and waited for the training to end. But the main difficulty remains whether Kazan will obey commands in the presence of other dragons. And the other animals at this time already sense the presence of a stranger and become very nervous. Lydia gives Kazan the order to stand down and hopes that the dragon will listen to her. Something amazing happens, and the animal meekly presses itself to the ground. After this, the girl firmly asks the dragon to step back a little more. Although Kazan is not particularly happy, he still obeys his trainer. Even other dragons are calmed by the sight of the animal obeying commands. Until this moment, no one had been able to make the dragon be controlled. No one but the Duke was able to control Kazan. However, Lydia was able to fulfill her promise and showed perfect dragon obedience. Although she has worked hard to train Kazan to obey orders, something still bothers her. The Duke should be pleased with this event, but his facial expression does not show it. After this, Lydia decides to break the silence and says that that's all for now. And nothing, even in training, is ever truly perfect. A dragon is a living creature, and it is impossible to predict when it might break loose. After this, Albrecht decides to turn to his new personal trainer. He announces that Lydia will now oversee the training of trainee trainers at the duchy. It is impossible to describe the emotions our heroine experienced at that moment. After all, before this, she had not even imagined that all these people were just students. It turns out that the personal trainers of the Albrecht house left for various reasons. And all this time, students worked and trained with the dragons. Lydia is indignant that she is only learning about this now. After all, both people and dragons could die during the work. Besides, Kazan could stop obeying at any moment and go berserk. But the Duke reminds that the trainer initially took full responsibility for the dragon. Therefore, in case of failure, she would have to take all the blame. After some time, Lydia gets back to work. But what happened can't get out of her head. Once upon a time, such a rare dragon had a personal trainer, but now there is no one. This is comparable to the fact that a noble family would not have a pedigree. At this moment, Albrecht hears the girl's words and explains that she is mistaken, and he decided to come in to praise Lydia for training Kazan. But after hearing this, he understands that this will no longer be necessary. The Duke then asks if the trainer remembers the terms of the contract. If a trainer personally decides that additional training is necessary, then he is entitled to a bonus. Therefore, Lithia must decide whether a team of students is up to Kazen's training. Then, the training of these people can be considered part of the preparation for training. After these words, Lydia cannot stop being amazed at how cleverly the Duke manages to twist everything. But Albrand asks her not to worry, as she will rightfully receive her award. Moreover, Kazen behaves with her like a meek lamb on a leash. At this moment, the girl realizes that the Duke is angry because the dragon obeys another person. Although Albrand doesn't really respond to this thought still doesn't leave our heroine. But now Lydia agrees that, according to the contract, teaching students is also part of her responsibilities. But besides this, there should be at least some secret training techniques in the house. Lydia wonders if such training sessions were recorded. And at this moment, the Duke asks how well the girl knows about his family. Most likely, Lydia must have heard at least some gossip about the Albrand house. But our heroine is not very knowledgeable about the affairs of the nobility, since she mainly trained dragons for members of the former kingdom. After this, the Duke explains that the ducal house has managed without an Agrix dragon for 100 years, and those who inherited the house during this time were not the true successors. When there is no direct heir, everyone starts fighting for this place. One of the uncles was especially greedy and dealt cruelly with his personal trainers. After this news, Lydia doesn't even know what to answer the Duke. Now she understands that in this case, training the dragon will take time. And while the girl will be working with Kazen, she will also try to learn from the students. Lithia is also suspending plans to move the Agrix type enclosure. Instead, she plans to increase his interaction time with other dragons. Albrand gives his approval and explains that he is somewhat surprised. This was not discussed when the contract was signed, and the Duke thought that after hearing this, the girl would decide to terminate it. But Lydia reports that in that case, the man would definitely find a way to make her keep quiet about the family's shame. After all, a simple trainer cannot have access to such information. The next day, Lydia first of all sets about implementing her plan. Together with the Duke's secretary, she gathers all the trainee trainers. Baskel announces Albrand's order, according to which Lydia is now his personal trainer. Also, from this day on, she will be responsible for teaching students and asks for support in this. But as expected, the atmosphere among the students is not very welcoming. Baskel explains that before expressing your complaints and requests, it is worth thinking about a few things. The trainer Lydia was personally chosen by the Duke and deserves respect. At this moment, our heroine feels that the atmosphere has become even more tense. How can one speak in an environment where everyone is so surprised by her appearance? And those who already know the girl are wary and hostile. But Lydia decides to pull herself together and announces that she is indeed responsible for teaching the students. However, she doesn't know more about the Albrand house than these people know. Therefore, the girl is ready to share her knowledge from the Asher Center in exchange for information about the dragons of the duchy. At this moment, one of the students in the crowd raises his hand. The man wonders if the Duke could have hired an incompetent person as a trainer. After all, an incompetent trainee can easily incur the dragon's wrath, which often happens in this house. But Lydia explains that this is precisely why she asks them to share information. After all, no one wants to die at the clutches of the Duke's beloved dragon. And the other girl replies that they are just interns who don't even have a license. However, our heroine replies that despite this, they all love dragons, and she is not going to give orders, as she just wants to be a colleague. As someone who truly loves dragons, Lydia plans to work with her students to take care of them. After this, the girl bows and humbly asks people for help. After some time, Lydia recalls her last conversation with the Duke. At that time, she was sure that a man could easily force her to remain silent about the family's shame. But after these words, Albrand only laughed loudly and sincerely. He likes the girl's intelligence, and if it weren't for that, she would have long ago shared the fate of her previous trainers. And Lydia begins to think that the Duke has gone mad with such direct threats. At this point, Albrand decides to leave and adds that he will provide the girl with a decent salary. But before that moment, she must prove her worth to him, just like the other interns. After this conversation, our heroine cannot come to terms with the responsibilities placed upon her. Employers really do love to threaten life and money, and one of the interns reports that the best way to understand dragons is to work with them directly. So he offers her to provide food for all the creatures in the duchy. The intern even laughs and explains that it is an easy, basic task, and Lytia cannot give in to him and say that it will be difficult for her to cope with such a volume of work alone. After all, then this could be used as a reason to find fault with anything. But our heroine doesn't want to listen to the Duke's lamentations. Therefore, gritting her teeth, she has to agree to inhumane conditions. Lytia smiles happily and tells the intern that she can easily handle such a simple task. And in such a case, the man can go and do other things. From now on, she takes on basic tasks and complete feeding of the dragons. She also asks the surprised intern to leave quickly, so as not to disturb her. After these words, the man abruptly runs away, so that the girl doesn't have time to change her mind. But these people are not the only ones who tried to humiliate our heroine. After all, she had a lot of experience at the Ashar training center. The guys clearly messed with the wrong person and will regret entrusting her with the complete feeding of the dragons. After this, Lydia approaches one of the enclosures and promises to bring the animal food as soon as possible. However, she notices very strange scales on his back. The girl comes to the conclusion that the dragon is underfed and is completely exhausted, so it's no surprise to her to see the animal greedily devouring its ration. Lythia is very angry that these people brought the dragons to this state, but she will definitely hammer into their heads what real training is. Meanwhile, the trainee passes on information to another student about what happened. Even the elders told him that it was the student's responsibility to at least feed the dragons. But the other man is indignant that they have been caring for these animals for many years. And then some trainer from the capital arrives and is going to lead them. At the same time, she also talks about some stupid love for dragons. The man is sure that Lytia will soon run away on her own, because it will be too hard for her. A week later, one of the interns notices that something is wrong with the dragon. At the sight of the disciples, all beings became very restless. Even the self-confident intern Bruce doesn't know what to do in such a situation. Just a few days ago, the dragons were very calm and quiet. But why, for no apparent reason, did all the animals suddenly go berserk? At this moment, Lydia approaches the enclosures and asks why everyone is gathered here. Now is not the time for training, and she does not understand the sudden visit of people. And the interns decide not to tell the girl that the dragons are very worried. After this, Lydia says that she needs to prepare food for the animals. Our heroine leaves, and Bruce notices a surprising detail. All the dragons that had just been making noise suddenly stopped doing so. As soon as this woman entered the enclosures, everything instantly became quiet. Bruce realizes that the trainer is not as simple as she seems. After this, he decides to catch up with the girl and asks her to give him some time. But our heroine explains that she is too busy, as she needs to feed 30 dragons. And all this time, the students from the house of Duke Albrant kept their mouths shut. And only when their dragons became uncontrollable did they take matters into their own hands. At this point, the most impudent trainee of them all decides to apologize to the trainer. But Lytia doesn't give up and explains that she doesn't even know what this man is asking for forgiveness for. The students dumped all their work on her, and when things got tough, they decided to show some respect. After these words, the other interns immediately volunteer to help the girl. However, Lydia advises them to get out and solve the problem themselves. Since the interns started this mess themselves, they should clean it up themselves. The students found themselves at a dead end and crawled to the girl when their dragons became uncontrollable. If they wanted to set her up for feeding, they should have understood how it would end. The trainees most likely referred to the senior trainer and said that it was Lythia who should feed the dragons. But they did not take into account that the student must provide half of the daily ration. The remaining part is given out during training or completing tasks. This is how dragons develop obedience to the student's orders. And if the trainees decide to get involved in the fight without knowing anything, they should get burned at least once. Now, Lydia finally finishes her business and decides to devote time to Kazen. Since the dragon was sleeping at the time, he greeted his trainer with a growl. But Lytia asks to be allowed to take a little rest with him. It's a rare moment of rest, and she doesn't want it to be interrupted. Our heroine lies down next to the dragon and presses herself against his scales. Suddenly, she begins to experience indescribable sensations. It's so nice and warm to lie next to Kazen that he looks more like a purring cat than a dragon. At this time, Albrant decides to go out into the yard and notices his pet there. He is very surprised that his dragon does not run to meet him. The Duke even begins to worry that Kazen might have fallen ill. However, the dragon lifts his wing and reveals the sleeping Lythia, whose sleep he is trying to guard. Albrant is very surprised that the coach sleeps in the middle of the working day. At the same time, he notices that Lytia is very exhausted from work. It seems the students are not listening to the orders of the Duke's personal trainer. Just recently, Baskel reported to his master that the girl was single-handedly caring for 30 dragons. Then, Albrant was outraged that he had not been told about this earlier. But the secretary explains that in this situation, not everything is so clear-cut. Lytia believes that this is an internal conflict between the coaches and is trying to resolve it on her own. Although, under such an overload, the girl could use her powers and punish the students. At this point, Kazan makes it clear to the Duke that Lytia should not be woken up. Albrant decides that he will not interfere in the showdown for now, and will observe for a little while longer. But the Duke is not going to tolerate her overwork and such injustice for too long. After all, if the trainer responsible for Kazan collapses from exhaustion, it will become a big problem. After some time, the girl wakes up from the scream of a man looking for a coach. Lytia didn't even have time to notice how she fell asleep, and this fact frightens her. The girl jumped up abruptly, disturbing the dragon, and then began to apologize to him. And the cries of the student, who is very worried about something, continue to this day. Lytia is very angry that the interns call her as if they lost their child. She asks the student to be quiet, as he has entered the territory of the Agrix enclosure. On the one hand, the young man is very happy that he found a coach, but at the same time he is very scared. Lytia is already familiar with this anxious feeling, and first she asks the student to calm down. And after the young man has caught his breath, he tells his coach the terrible news. It turns out that all the jumping dragons have escaped from their enclosures. As soon as the trainees opened the pen, the animals broke free and no one could stop them. The disciples were about to put the bits on the horses, but they took advantage of this moment. And now our heroine will have to sort out the mistake of a bunch of interns. Lytia is filled with rage and tries to find out if the students were even going to stop the dragons. But the young man explains that the leader led the entire herd away, and the other dragons simply did not obey them. Of course, Lytia would very much like to leave the interns to deal with this incident themselves. However, if the situation is not brought under control, things could end much worse. That's why, at that very moment, the girl asks Kazan to get ready for the flight. And Lydia orders the intern to open wide the gates of the corral for the racehorses. After all, right now she is going to bring the escaped herd back. The dragon mount is covered in scales rather than fur, and has antlers similar to a deer's. These animals look like horses, and Lytia begins to think about where the whole herd would go. At this point, she asks Kazan to fly even higher to see the area. The dragon immediately obeys the trainer and rises sharply into the sky. Finally, our heroine notices the herd lost by the interns. Given dragons' equine instincts, an open field is the most obvious place for them. After this, Lytia looks closely at the individuals and finds the leader among them. The girl notices that he is very pleased with the current situation. At this moment, she takes her pipe and starts blowing into it. The leader immediately reacts to the sound and raises his head to the sky. After this, Kazan lands and blocks the herd's path. Lytia dismounts from the Agrix dragon and stands in front of the steeds. The girl tells the leader that it is time for them to return back to the duchy. But from the horse's reaction, she understands that the animals are not particularly going to listen to her. If she had come alone, it could have been a problem, but Agrix made the girl's task easier. It is unlikely that any dragon would agree to go against such a strong individual. Meanwhile, the interns have opened the gates and are beside themselves with excitement. Quite a bit of time has passed, but there are still no horses. Such a massive loss of dragons would have dire consequences for them. At this point, one of the students suggests taking a break and trying to catch the animals again. But how will they do this if even on horses, they won't be able to catch up with the frightened herd? Even if the men somehow manage to find the dragons, it is unlikely that they will be able to force them to return. Now we will have to think about the compensation that the Duke will demand for the lost herd. Suddenly, one worried intern runs towards his colleagues. He tries to catch his breath and starts saying something about dragon mounts. All the individuals suddenly decided to return and headed towards the gate. Our heroine rides with them, riding on the leader, showing the horses the way. Lytia shouts loudly at the students to open the training field gates immediately. The trainees react instantly, and the wooden gates slowly open. After this, the entire herd runs inside at breakneck speed. Lytia gives the leader the command to stop and can finally breathe freely. The girl dismounts from her horse under the surprised glances of her students. She can barely restrain herself from pouring out all her anger on the men. After all, how could professional dragon tamers be so negligent in their duties? And how could it be allowed that an entire herd could escape? After these words, all the interns just hang their heads guiltily. And Lithia is trying to wait for at least some kind of explanation from people. At this point, the intern with the most authority decides to step forward. He heads to Lithia to answer for all his colleagues. The man falls to his knees in front of the coach and explains that he is very sorry. Now the trainees are ready to admit that their methods were wrong. After such a failure, Bruce expects Lithia to punish them severely. However, instead, the girl suggests stopping the squabbles and starting to work together. The intern never expected that after everything, Lydia would treat them so favorably. Frankly speaking, he was completely prepared for them to be fired from their jobs. But Lydia said from the very beginning that she really needed these people, and she never once tried to diminish their dedication to the cause. The only thing our heroine wants to achieve is mutual respect. After these words, Bruce extends his hand and shakes it with the coach. He is very grateful to Lydia for everything she has done for him and the students. Now Bruce and the other students are ready to fully take the trainer's side. But at that moment, the Duke suddenly appears with his knights. Albrant decides to find out what is going on in his territory. Lydia explains to her employer that there was a minor incident and everything is now under control. However, the Duke is already aware of the situation and believes that the escape of an entire herd cannot be called a minor incident. After all, we are talking about the loss of dragon mounts belonging to the duchy's cavalry. Now our heroine has to come up with something that will protect her students. From a technical point of view, Albrant says the right things. But the dragon mounts returned safe and sound, and the leader proved to be particularly capable. After all, in addition to the previous herd, several more wild individuals joined the animals. Such news may be considered a reason to turn a blind eye to the incident. But the Duke has no intention of forgiving the interns for such a major mistake. However, Lydia explains that dismissing students could lead to problems. Even if the Duke feeds the animals himself, he will not be able to train them. These interns are in great demand, as they are the ones who know the Duke's dragons best. After this, Albrant reports that thanks to trainer Lydia, he will not severely punish the trainers. However, he will lower their salaries for a whole year and then fire them if they do not prove their worth during this time. The trainees accept their punishment and bow to the Duke. Even if the trainers are valuable assets, the Albrant family has the wealth and influence to find new ones. And if it weren't for Coach Lydia, everything wouldn't have ended so easily. Finally, this hard and long day ends and night comes. But Albrant is unhappy that Lithia sleeps in the dragon's enclosure. Meanwhile, our heroine has settled comfortably in the warm Kazan. This situation seems obvious precisely because Agrix adores his trainer. However, the Duke has no intention of leaving his personal trainer in this position. It might be comfortable for Kazan to sleep like this, but Lydia needs more humane conditions. Albrant persuades the dragon to leave the girl under the pretext that otherwise she might get sick and not come to him. Although Kazinu does not want to part with Lydia, his master's arguments still seem reasonable to him. The dragon calms down, and Albrant calmly carries the trainer, who is sleeping in his arms, out of the enclosure. After this, Albrant carried his personal trainer to his ducal house. At this moment, he thinks that the essence of a person is revealed only when he is pushed against the wall. Until now, he had no trainer he could trust. Passing by the servants, the Duke asks to prepare a restroom for the trainer Lydia. He reminds her that she is the only trainer in the entire duchy and must be treated as such. Lydia not only returned the escaped dragons, but also brought the wild ones with her and won Kazan's trust. All doubts about her license and qualifications were dispelled by her responsible actions. This girl is a very rare and valuable find, so it is unclear how she could remain in the shadows all this time. And our heroine at this moment is sleeping peacefully on her employer's chest and is unaware of his thoughts. At this moment, Albrant begins to feel a strange sensation in his chest. This girl made a strong impression on him, and apparently that is why he looks in her direction more and more often. The next morning began in a calm and serene atmosphere. Lydia wakes up in an unfamiliar place and tries to somehow come to her senses after such a surprise. She rises from the bed and does not understand who she is and where she is. Then the girl starts laughing, as she always dreamed of saying this when she found herself in an unfamiliar environment. However, she clearly remembers dozing off next to Kazen's warm scales. Suddenly, the butler enters the room and warmly greets the lady. The man asks the girl to rest, as this was the order of his lordship. Now it finally dawned on Lytia where she was, and who had brought her here. The butler also adds that the priest noticed that the girl was very tired, and that she slept all day. Lytia begins to panic greatly, as Kazen must have gone without food all day. But at that moment, the Duke enters the room and asks our heroine not to worry. The man took on some of the responsibilities, and had already managed to feed the pet. He also invites Lytia to eat together, and the girl does not understand when he managed to become so nice. After some time, Lydia changes into her clothes and goes to have breakfast with Albrant. She thought that awkwardness would spoil her appetite, but the food turned out to be very tasty. At this point, the Duke announces that sleeping in Kazen's enclosure could be dangerous. Lythia knows this, but his scales are so warm that the girl simply cannot resist the temptation. Albrant doesn't intend to blame the coach, but asks her not to do it again. He also explains that our heroine's actions impressed him. And in fact, this whole story with Kazen's socialization is just a pretext. The Duke's real goal is to find a personal trainer for his house. Our heroine's face shows genuine shock at this revelation. Albrant also decides to inquire whether, according to Lythia, Agrix-type dragons should really live in groups. But the girl still can't recover from the shock of the Duke's words and doesn't answer him. Suddenly, she announces that socialization training is still necessary. The thing is that Kazen is not a wild dragon and lives among ordinary people. If he hurts someone, there will be only one solution, despite the dragon's rare appearance. After these words, the atmosphere changes dramatically, and the Duke asks to clarify what Lytia means. The girl replies that we are talking about euthanasia, which will be a forced measure. And from Albrant's reaction, she understands perfectly well that he would not want this. At this moment, the Duke jumps up from the table and knocks over his glass of wine. The man loudly declares that he will never allow this to happen to his pet. However, even if the Duke is against it, he will not be able to resist the imperial family. A dragon nicknamed a living volcano without socialization can cause chaos. Although Lytia says cruel things, it is not only about Kazen. The thing is that the human world is not at all made for dragons. The absence of incidents only confirms the Duke's exceptional care for Kazen. While the decision to socialize may not be an easy one, it is still something Albrant should consider. And as a contract dragon trainer, Lythia will give her all for Kazen and her employer. After hearing everything, the Duke cannot come to his senses and digest the information. And at this moment, Lytia decides to ask how long her vacation will last. Albrant turns around abruptly and says that a week will be enough. But our heroine never expected such a long period, and what worries her most is taking care of Kazen. However, the Duke explains that before the trainer arrived, he looked after the dragon himself. Lythia is his only trainer, and therefore he puts the trainer's health first. After a difficult conversation, the girl finally decides to take a breather and relax. Today, there was a very direct conversation that did not produce any results. The Duke's concern for Kazen is genuine, but their conversations are constantly sidetracked. And while our heroine is deep in thought, the maid offers to bring more food. After this, Lydia decides to finally relax and enjoy her vacation. Thus passed 3 days of our heroine's well-deserved rest in the Duchy of Albrant. That day, Lytia armed herself with several books and walked around the house. There she met Albrant, who was very puzzled about something. Although the girl finds this strange, she decides to ask him about shortening her vacation time. But the Duke remains adamant and orders the coach to get plenty of rest. The man is not going to entrust work to a person who has not yet recovered. And Lytia is still wary of the Duke's condition and thinks that he is not well. But she thinks that Albrant would have clearly reported it if there was something serious. On the 5th day of her vacation, Lytia hears the alarmed cry of an intern. The girl gives the out-of-breath young man a glass of lemonade and asks him to drink it before speaking. After this, the man asks his trainer to look at the Agrix dragon. Lythia thought that the young man had problems with ordinary dragons and did not expect to hear about Kazen. But the animals under the trainee's control are fine, as they follow the trainer's recommendations. However, the Agrix dragon makes loud cries at night and frightens other individuals who are injured as a result. Although the Duke promised to deal with the situation himself, nothing changed. So the intern decided to approach Lythia, while the other students distracted Albrant. The trainer is outraged that the Duke did not tell her anything about what happened during their meeting. After this, she demands that the intern immediately take her to the restless dragon, and they mount their steeds together. At that moment, she hears a shrill roar that frightens even animals. The stables are too far from the estate, but because of their size, even careful movements make noise. Usually, distance muffles their cries, but this time it didn't. At this moment, the intern hears perfect silence and realizes that this has never happened before. After this, Lydia gets off the dragon and rushes like a bullet into Kazen's pen. To her great surprise, she finds Duke Albrant there too, and the dragon Agrix is very angry and attacks our heroine. But it was just a burst of joy, after which Kazen begins to lick his trainer. At this point, Lydia decides to explain herself to the Duke and says that she cannot rest easy due to the dragon's strange behavior. Then she notices that Albrant and Kazen are like two sides of the same coin. Dragons usually resemble their owners, and now these two continue to pretend that everything is fine with them. And Kazen still can't stop feeling joy and licks Lydia from head to toe. The girl realizes that the dragon is still angry at her for taking the day off, and even the Duke's care during all this time could not replace Kazinu's beloved trainer. Realizing all this, Lithia sincerely apologizes to the Agrix dragon. At this moment, Albrant approaches her, demonstrating all his displeasure. The man is outraged that the trainer ignored his words, but our heroine notices something strange in his facial expression. For some reason, this face reminds her of a conversation that took place just recently. Lydia and the Duke talked about Kazen's need for socialization. She couldn't get the fact that the Duke was constantly diverting the conversation from her mind. It turns out that all this is not only because his dragon is getting closer to the trainer. At this moment, Kazen grabs his trainer by the shirt and pulls her along with him. Lithia looks at the dragon, but can't tear herself away from her thoughts. It turns out that the decision is not up to the senior trainer, but up to Kazen himself. And from the very beginning, the Duke had no intention of accepting anyone but himself and his dragon. After some time, Kazen is finally content with free walks. At this moment, Lydia is next to him and analyzes the truth of what happened. If she raised a dragon with love for more than 10 years, and then he started listening to another trainer, she would also be offended. But unlike the Duke, Lydia would be able to show that she was in pain. But Albrant's facial expression shows only distrust. The girl heard that those who are chosen by dragons begin to experience deeper feelings for them. And that day, she decided to apologize for the animal's behavior, since it was only her mistake. Everything points to the fact that Lithia and Kazen have a special connection, which means that the dragon himself chose her. Albrant didn't want to disturb the girl's vacation, but he couldn't cope with the pet and allows her to return to work. Now, no matter what happens, if Lithia makes a mistake, she will have to pay for it. Ideally, the trainer should correct all these problems during the dragon's childhood. But it seems that no one even hinted at this option to these two. At this moment, Lydia also thinks about how nice it would be to bathe Kazen in the lake, and the dragon notices that his trainer is very worried about something. He decides to bask next to her for a bit, but the girl asks him not to interfere. After this, the dragon demonstratively falls on its back and begins to scream. Then he wriggles in all directions, trying to attract attention, but Lydia demands to stop and turn to her owner for affection. These were rather rude words, after which Kazen became very sad. He leaves, and Lydia shows indifference on her face. To be honest, it's also unbearably painful for her that she can't hug the dragon who simply loves her. Besides, Kazen is so cute that it's impossible to resist him. But our heroine is forced to be strict to correct the situation. After all, Kazen and the Duke need to establish contact with each other. These two need each other and should not be separated. And from that moment on, Lydia became the personal trainer not only of Kazen, but also of the Duke. Meanwhile, the Duke calmly goes about his business on this sunny day. Suddenly, the man begins to hear some strange movement. At that moment, Kazen flies at him with all his might and pounces. The dragon throws its master to the ground and stands above him. After this, he begins to lick Albrant, showing his love. Lithia is very pleased to see the picture of these two spending time together. Although this is a surprising moment for the Duke, it is still impossible to retrain a dragon in one day. Moreover, just recently, Kazen had been crying all day and calling for Coach Lydia. All this indicates that the trainer used some kind of trick. However, Albrant cannot resist the gaze of his pet. In them, he recalls the moment when, as a child, he became friends with this dragon. Now he understands that this is not a deception, and Kazan is really glad to see him. Finally, Lydia can rest assured about her employer. After this, the girl asks to be released to the interns to train them. But this moment made the Duke realize a lot, and he decides to turn to the coach. Judging by the expression on Albrandt's face, Lydia is now in for a serious conversation. However, the Duke sincerely asks our heroine for forgiveness for his behavior. Previously, the dragon was always near him and did not let anyone near him. And these days, Kazan suddenly began to cry because of another person. Lydia accepts Albrandt's apology and says that everything is fine. After all, she is Kazan's personal trainer and is responsible for such things. But Albrandt never expected that Lydia would so easily forgive his distrust of her. Meanwhile, our heroine is pleased with the Duke's reaction, as everything went well. She plans to continue to win his trust through her actions. After this, Kazan and Albrandt hug sweetly, watching their personal trainer go. Sometime later, Lydia visits her interns in the dragon enclosure. A lot has changed here since the students recognize the coach. She is even surprised by the reaction of the interns, who greet her with a smile. After this, the girl announces that she plans to start short training sessions from today. But before that, our heroine asks for help in checking the dragons. Upon examination, Lydia learns that one of the dragons belongs to Lord Bascal, and that he himself walks with it. The girl remembers that this is the same secretary who serves the Duke. His dragon is a rare panther stalker breed that he got from Albrandt. Lydia understands that the Duke truly values Bascal, since he gave him such a rare beast. The girl also learns that the two have been friends since childhood. The trainer has no idea yet that one of the dragons will gain even more of her attention. At this moment, bright blue eyes are watching our heroine from the enclosure. The girl notices the dragon's strange behavior and thinks that something is bothering him. Lydia extends her hand to the beast and asks him to come closer. Suddenly, the dragon jumps forward and opens its mouth with sharp fangs. All the trainees come running to the noise and try to make sure that the trainer is okay. Our heroine calmly turns to the students and informs them that she is fine. She then asks the intern who is caring for the Mazalid dragon to come over. She wonders if the young man noticed anything unusual or even the slightest deviation. The intern recalls that Lewis was always very sensitive and more receptive than other individuals. She has always been a dragon who reacts sharply to everything that happens. Because of this, Lewis has already changed her previous owner once. This happened at a time when a struggle for the succession to the title was underway in the ducal house of Albrandt. All that is known is that Lewis's previous owner and trainer died. Now Lydia finally understands why this dragon is so sensitive. After all, these are very intelligent creatures who understand that if a new owner appears, then the previous one will never return. One of the interns decides to ask if there is any method for this dragon. He understands that he is behaving impudently, but he still wants to hope for something. After this, Lydia asks who owns the dragon now, and she is told that it is Lady Derna. This woman is the only alchemist in the ducal house of Albrandt. And after some time, Lydia decides to find out about the alchemist from the Duke himself. But before we start talking, Albrandt wants to know what happened. While the man is busy with paperwork, Lydia decides to tell everything frankly. In her opinion, all the dragons in the ducal house have problems. However, Lewis's case requires very urgent intervention. There is a high probability that this dragon can cause trouble. All this time, there were only interns around him, and Lydia suspected that it would come to this. But to last more than 10 years under the supervision of students is amazing. If our heroine were offered to raise dragons in such conditions, she would simply refuse. And these trainees worked hard all this time, even though they allowed the horses to escape. Now they are punished and have only 1 year to prove their qualifications. After this, Lydia proposes to certify all students this year. After all, then they will prove that they have improved and no one will dare fire them. The surprised Duke raises his eyes and looks intently at Lydia, and the girl at this moment does not look away, showing the seriousness of her intentions. After this, the man puts his hand on the table and stops these glances. Lydia is already thinking that she should have simply started persuading the Duke, rather than turning the conversation into a contest of wills. At this point, Albrandt suddenly announces that he will not interfere if this is the coach's opinion. After all, he understands that it is Lydia who knows best how everything should be. After this, the Duke expresses his trust in the girl in everything, including Kazan. Lithia then decides to go to Lady Durna, who is rumored to be completely absorbed in research. But Albrant conveyed a message that could be shown to the girl if she tried to ignore our heroine. Today, the Duke is too kind and even readily agreed to the certification of the interns. In any case, this is a big relief for Lithia and one less problem. Now we can focus on another issue, and our heroine knocks on the door. However, her attempts to get through to him are a complete failure. Our heroine even begins to think that there is no one in the room. But at that moment, the doors swing open, and she is greeted by a dark-haired girl. This is the very same Lady Durna, who is the alchemist of the ducal house. Judging by the girl's mood, Lithia feels as if she is communicating with a mad cat, but she decides to be friendly and tells the alchemist her name. Then, Lithia hands the Duke's message to the girl, who studies it carefully. Finally, after a strange interrogation, Durna lets the coach into his room. However, it seems as if a herd of dragons has run through here. At this moment, the girl decides to ask why Lithia came to her, and our heroine replies that she is here about the dragon Lewis. Suddenly, the atmosphere becomes very tense, and Durna's face changes. The girl begins to worry that something has happened to Louis, but Lithia calms the alchemist and says that the dragon was not harmed and did nothing wrong. However, there is a high probability that this will happen soon. In this regard, our heroine suggests a course of corrective training and asks the owner to devote more time to the pet. Durna doesn't understand why her dragon's behavior has become a problem if he's always been like this. After this, Lydia decides to talk frankly with the girl and ask her questions. She is interested in how many times a week the owner visits her dragon, and how much time does she spend with Louis when she comes to see him. At this point, Lady Durna falls silent. Having nothing to say in response, the room is plunged into a gloomy atmosphere and deathly silence. After this, Lithia decides to ask directly if Durna cares about her dragon, and in general, she is interested to know whether the alchemist values his pet. But even after such a direct question, our heroine is met with silence. After this, everything becomes clear to her, and no answer is required. Therefore, Lithia suggests that Durna give the dragon to another person and not torment him just because of the water he produces. However, the girl starts screaming loudly that she cannot do it. But Lithia has already met people who are not ready to give up the dragon, although their actions show a cruel attitude towards them. These people call themselves masters and fiercely defend this right. Therefore, Lithia reports that there will be no need to replace the owner if Lady Durna wishes to change something. Although, as a trainer, she actually believes that it would be better for the girl to give up the dragon. At this point, Lady Bad openly reveals that she was trying to get closer to Lewis. But the dragon never opened his heart, and everything even came to an incident. That day, Lewis was especially irritated, and suddenly, Durna felt a burning sensation and saw blood. After this, a huge scar from the dragon's claws remained on her stomach. The priest said that if the wound had been a little deeper, all the insides would have fallen out. After hearing this, Lydia even more doesn't understand why Durna hasn't yet handed over the dragon to another person. But the girl is still adamant and says that she cannot part with Luira. Tears begin to flow from her eyes, as it used to be her father's dragon. The girl really wanted to be friends with Lewis, but now the moment of injury appears before her eyes every time. Sometime later, the Duke and his dragon are lounging during an afternoon stroll, and Lithia tells Albrant that they will have to request more artifacts. It involves a mazelid dragon named Louis, who has behavioral issues. As Lithia already said, all animals have various shortcomings, but with Luira, the situation is most urgent and cannot be delayed. In the future, these artifacts may be useful for working with other dragons. After this, Lydia asks the Duke if he knew about Lady Durna's injuries. But it was precisely because of this that Albrant fired the trainer, who was then working with the dragon. Our heroine is very sorry that it all ended with her being fired. However, the Duke explains that this is not quite what the girl thought. The Durna family has been involved in alchemy for generations, and as is known, such families often have secret knowledge passed down from generation to generation. It is not difficult to guess what the motives of the trainers were when they tried to specifically approach Luira. This trainer was sent, and his goal was not only to obtain the secrets, but also to eliminate the alchemists. Although the Duke explained all this to Durna, she was more concerned only with Luira's attack. After this, everything falls into place for our heroine. Now she understands why Lady Durna feels such emotions. The blame for the dragon attack lies largely with the trainer, but the girl, for some reason, still decided to blame herself for this. A dragon that has lost its beloved master will not easily accept someone new. That's why Luira has built an impenetrable wall in her heart, and it's hard to understand how strong it is. For Lady Dirna, this dragon evokes both pity and horror. She shared with Litia that sometimes Louis makes a roar that is completely different from his usual one. When a girl hears it, she becomes unbearably sad. She wanted to convey to the dragon that she was not the only one who had lost someone, but she was unable to do so. Dirna would really like the coach to take care of Lei and be able to change something. And while Litia is lost in her thoughts, the Duke decides to do something with the help of Kazan. The dragon walks around its master, who is watching the girl closely. After this, the Duke gives Kazan a hand signal to do something for Lydia. Although the dragon does not know what the trainer's reaction will be, he still decides to come closer. After this, he begins to caress the girl and distracts her from bad thoughts. Litia pets the Duke's pet and understands that he was very worried about her. Then the trainer thanks Kazan and says that, thanks to him, she feels better. But now he must go up to the Duke and ask him to pet him too. Albrandt is very surprised that Lithia can remain so calm. After all, it is very difficult to do this in relation to an animal that asks to be petted. And Litia explains that a trainer's job is not to love dragons. You need to be able to distinguish between the personal and the professional. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to part with the dragons after training. These words make the Duke think seriously about what is happening. He then says that in Kazan's case, an exception can be made. And a little warmth from Lithia certainly won't hurt him. After all, the girl is his personal trainer. These words seem to give our heroine a second wind, as it was difficult for her to restrain herself in front of Kazan. But the Duke notices the girl's defiant look, as she still cannot believe what is happening. If Albrandt himself said so, then this offer seems very tempting. However, it is still better to keep a small distance between Lithia and Kazan. But now our heroine decides to cheer up the depressed dragon a little. Finally, she can show emotion and offer Kazan to pet him. At this moment, an explosion of happiness occurs inside the dragon, and he pounces on the trainer. The girl praises Kazan for being patient for so long and for earning a treat. Since the employer himself asks to show more warmth, Litia is happy to do so. Besides, it's definitely not worth angering the Duke with your refusal now. And after some time, Lithia goes to the pen with the other dragons. There she finds Luira, who is still in a detached and angry mood. Even when they burn armfuls of soothing incense, she still remains in this state. After that, she asks Coach Russell if it is possible to make the door transparent. The man replies that this is possible and sets the switch to the desired mode. At this moment, the bars of the pen disappear and become completely transparent. Lithia then decides to move on to the next part of her plan. The girl asks the intern to help her with the table so that she can be close to Louis all the time. She will only leave when she needs to take care of Kazan. Although Luira didn't attack Coach Russell during his care, it still can't be said that she likes him. Even if this is all a necessary step, it is still unpleasant for the dragon. But she also needs to understand that she is not making contact just because there is a person in front of her. Now, Lydia makes herself comfortable next to her pen and creates a makeshift office for herself. Luira doesn't react to this in any way, because it will take time for behavior changes. After a while, Kazan sniffs Lichia's hand with concentration. The thing is, he clearly smelled another dragon on her. Lithia decided to socialize Kazan with another Agrix-type dragon, and everything is going quite well. If this pet can gradually get used to other individuals, then this will be an excellent result. Today is already the second week that the girl has been guarding Luira's pen and taking turns with Russell bringing her food. She just sat in front of the enclosure, and it seemed like the dragon had calmed down a bit. Although Luira remains cautious, she has nevertheless closed the distance. The dragon used to lie in the corner, but now he stretches his nose to sniff the girl, but she still prefers to avoid any other human movements. However, initially, Litia was prepared to wait months and even years for change. Everything went much better than she thought, and it was time to talk to Lady Dirna. Meanwhile, Kazan picked some daisies for his coach. It all looks so cute that Litia can't contain her emotions. Who would have thought that Kazan is actually a real living volcano? Such a big dragon can sometimes be so cute that it's hard to believe. But even with such moments, he won't stay here for too long. Lithia continues to gradually learn the habits of the dragons of the Agrix family, and now Kazan is like a child. Suddenly, after this thought, the girl gets the idea to switch places with Luira. After some time, our heroine brings Lady Dirna to the dragon's enclosure, but judging by her condition, she is already beginning to doubt whether the girl will cope. Of course, Dirna is scared, but she is reassured by the fact that Louis will remain outside the cage. After these words, Lydia takes the girl's trembling hands and decides to check something. She decides to support Lady Dirna and promises to stop everything as soon as she wants it. The girl asks the alchemist not to worry and just say hello to the dragon. This will be the first time in a long time that Lady Dirna has decided to take such a step. After this, Lithia remains behind, and the girl goes to meet Luira. Dirna takes a step and prepares to cross the threshold of the enclosure. At this moment, Luira appears from the darkness, letting out an ominous roar. The girl begins to tremble with fear and barely finds the strength to say hello. And Lithia notes the fact that dragons are much more wary of their masters than of ordinary people. Luira has already seen a lot, so the trainer decides to observe her behavior for a while. But the dragon's reaction turned out to be much worse than Lithia had expected. Luira jumps back from the pen and experiences intense horror. At this point, Lydia suggests that Lady Dirna end the first meeting, but suddenly, Luira pounces on her owner and collides with the glass of the enclosure. At this moment, the trainer realizes that the dragon didn't just want to scare Dirna. Luira actually tried to kill the girl with her huge claws. And the most surprising thing for the trainer was that the dragon was not aiming at Dirna. Luira wanted to kill Lydia, who was next to her mistress at that moment. After some time, the dragon still continues to demonstrate its aggressive attitude. At this moment, our heroine has a good idea. She asks Lady Dirna to push her, as if she were going to drive the girl out of the pen. If she does this, Lithia will immediately retreat, and the mistress will be able to communicate affectionately with Luira. The coach understands that Dirna is scared, and this is necessary in order to improve the relationship. The girl decides to obey Lydia and demonstratively pushes her. But the alchemist's pressure is so weak that her hands don't even touch the coach. Lithia asks to repeat this again, and Luira watches closely. Our heroine explains that Dirna must clearly show that she is kicking out the coach. After this, the girl gathers her courage and pushes Lithia with all her strength in front of the dragon. At the same time, she loudly asks the trainer to leave the pen. Lady Dirna's push is so strong that Lithia bounces back a fair distance. At this moment, the girl looks up at the trainer and once again demands to leave the enclosure. Lithia is pleased with how Dirna handled her task. After this, the coach demonstratively agrees to leave and asks to call her if anything is needed. Now, Luira and her owner are left completely alone in the enclosure. At this moment, the girl begins to hear the dragon's displeased growl. But she remembers that Lithia asked her to say something kind as soon as she left the pen. However, this turned out to be very difficult to do, as Dirna was too scared. The girl also decides to leave the enclosure and apologizes to the dragon. After this, Dirna suddenly jumps up and runs as fast as she can towards the exit. Meanwhile, the dragon leans against the glass and watches its mistress. After some time, Lady Dirna recovers from her experiences with the help of chamomile tea. She feels very ashamed that she couldn't cope with her emotions. However, Lithia asks the girl not to blame herself for what happened. After all, the real culprit is simply not in his place. Therefore, Lady Dirna should not take so much responsibility for what happened. Of course, both sides have to make an effort. But right now, Luira and Dirna are just victims. And according to the trainer's observations, the dragon does not hate its owner at all. After all, the true object of her aggression was Lydia's trainer, not Dirna. These words became a real discovery for the alchemist, which she had not even thought about. Luira had never behaved like this before, and so Lydia herself was surprised by her actions. When Dirna was not around, the dragon obeyed all her instructions. However, Luira simply ignored the orders of her mistress. After this, Lydia explains that this is the problem. In her opinion, the dragon simply does not recognize the girl as its owner. The situation is further aggravated by the fact that Dirna herself is afraid of Luira. And to achieve improvements, we must continue to act as we do today. Dirna tells the coach that she doesn't want to give up on Louis at all, but she doubts she'll be able to build a relationship with her. After this, Lydia reports that she cannot say this for sure, but if Lady Dirna is ready to fight further, then the coach promises to try his best. At this point, the girl replies that she still lacks a lot, but with tears in her eyes, she asks her trainer for help in establishing a relationship with the dragon. After all, the girl doesn't want to give up on Luira so easily. After some time, events unfold in the dragon enclosure. On this sunny day, Luira continues to lead a secluded life and does not let anyone near her. Suddenly, the enclosure is illuminated by a bright light, which envelops the dragon in its rays. Ahead, Luira sees that the gates of the enclosure are wide open. At this moment, Lady Dirna enters the room, recalling the events of past years. Then, the former owner's cub trembled before her, like a cornered rabbit. And when the master disappeared and the dragons were choking on blood, this pathetic weakling was unable to protect anyone. At this point, Luira starts growling at the girl again and shows aggression. But the hostess standing before her is no longer the same one, trembling with fear as before. After this, the dragon decides to hit the glass with its tail with all its might. Luira starts growling and tries to scare the intruder. However, Lady Dirna is no longer afraid of her dragon and demands that this stop. The girl was not afraid of Luira's aggression and continued to stand firmly in front of the glass. Suddenly, Dirna's confident demeanor reminded the dragon of her former master. The beast focuses his gaze on the girl and continues not to take it away. After this, the dragon leans against the glass, trying to touch its former owner. It seemed that at that moment, something in Luira's heart skipped a beat. However, the dragon clearly understands that her former master will no longer be in front of her. The animal's whole appearance continues to show that Dirna is a weak person. After this, Luira pounces on the glass again and opens her huge mouth. Litia had assumed that the dragon would not give in to its mistress so easily, and if the coach had not intervened, Dirna could have suffered. Luckily, our heroine has one more trump card up her sleeve, and with Kazen's help, she plans to teach the disobedient dragon a lesson. At this point, Lydia asks the girl to take a break and move away from the pen. Dirna turns her head and sees a trainer with an unusual dragon in front of her. Before this, the girl had never met an Agrix breed individual. Kazan seems to her to be a truly amazing and rare dragon. At this point, Luira begins to show genuine interest in the current situation. She notices how her mistress gently strokes a completely alien dragon. Luira doesn't like this at all, and she attacks us again. This frightens Lady Dirna greatly, and for a moment, she even removes her hand from Kazan. But Litia asks the girl not to stop, since Luira must understand that her mistress can leave for another dragon. And if the disobedient beast does not give in, then this will become true. Even if Dirna hesitates in this decision, Lydia will still do it. At this point, Kazan notices that someone has no understanding of good manners at all. Agrix decides to show his true power, making Luira look like a cub. After this, all her aggression and ardor instantly disappear. Even Dirna begins to worry and hopes that her dragon is not crying now. Not long before, Lithia gave the girl a potion of courage to overcome her fear. She praises Dirna for doing a great job today, and now she has to stay away from Luira's pen for a week. However, the girl can't calm down after seeing her dragon so scared. But Litia promises that she will definitely monitor the animal's health. At this moment, Kazan, who had also done a great job today, returns to her. Dirna understands that she needs to do everything as the coach says. After all, this is the only way she can try to improve her relationship with the dragon. And Lydia asks the owner not to worry, since now Luira will have to do it. A week later, during his work, the trainer notices a strange picture. The girl meets an excited Lady Dirna, who runs towards her. All this time, she was restless and worried about Luira's condition. Litia is amused by her anxiety and invites Dirna to see everything for herself. Although the trainer spoke with confidence, she actually didn't know exactly how much the dragon's behavior had changed. She can't even imagine what Luira's reaction will be now. If this plan doesn't work, then little can change the situation. At this moment, the dragon sees its mistress and turns on all its attention. Suddenly, Luira runs up to the glass of the pen where Dirna is standing. At that very second, the dragon, almost in tears, rushes to its mistress. Lady Dirna never expected to see such a touching reaction, and Litia suggests that the girl say something kind to the dragon in response. After this, she puts her hand to the glass, and Luira reciprocates. The dragon gently presses its nose to her palm and shows its affection. It is impossible to describe in words the emotions that Lady Dirna felt at that moment. For the first time in her life, she sees Luira show tenderness. The thing is that Lithia made it clear to the dragon that her mistress is the only person who loves and cares for her. It was a shock method, after which Dirna needed to build a proper relationship with Luira. At this moment, the shocked girl tells the coach that she has done the impossible. Lady Durna is grateful to the trainer for helping her keep her father's dragon. Litia is very happy with this result, and half of the journey completed. After this, she says goodbye to the alchemist for a while and is ready to take on other duties. Now the first crisis will pass, and Litia can breathe freely. But suddenly, 3 interns with strange expressions appear in front of her. Bruce explains that he found the situation with Luira surprising. After all, he personally saw how the dragon became more and more irritable and aggressive. Suddenly, looking at the students, Lydia remembers a more important matter. Preoccupied with the issue of Luira's socialization, she completely forgot about the deal with the Duke. At this point, the girl asks Bruce about his length of service, and he replies that he has been in the Duke's house for more than 10 years. In that case, Lithia wants to talk to Bruce about one important matter. After this, they retire, and the sky is illuminated by a bright sunset. Bruce understands that the coach is going to raise the issue of certification. Lithia wants to help trainees obtain official coaching licenses as much as possible. After all students have the appropriate knowledge and skills for this. And when the certificate appears, the difference between trainees and full-fledged trainers will disappear. Bruce thinks this is a great idea, since with a license, no one will kick them out after a year of punishment. But on the other hand, such an initiative does not make him very happy. Lithia was even a little taken aback and doesn't understand why Bruce reacted that way. Then the man explains that all this will be too difficult a task for him. It's impossible to describe our heroine's confusion when someone so easily refuses a promotion. And Bruce explains that he is not married, and his salary is quite enough for him. He finds studying difficult, and what he experiences is very different from the theory in the textbooks. However, Litia is confident that obtaining a license will be considered the best argument for the Duke not to fire the students. But suddenly, the girl realizes that this concerns not only Bruce. If you think about it, the coaches in the duchy have been through hell, and they have their own standards. These trainees passed the test of loyalty to the Duke and have been controlling dragons all this time. But do all the other students really think the same way as Bruce? Then the man replies that their opinion generally coincides with his position. Lydia didn't expect that the students wouldn't be happy to receive the certificate, but there's no turning back now. So she assures the man that she really wants all interns to get licensed. She doesn't belittle their experience in the least, as these people have dedicated more years to the duchy and the dragons than she has. But what is written in the books for obtaining a certificate is knowledge collected over many decades. Thus, Litia tried to use all arguments to convince Bruce. At this point, the man gives up and asks the trainer to stop. He reports that, in fact, they are all eager to get certificates. But they didn't want to ask the coach for help because she was very overloaded with work. After all, Lydia checks the condition of all the dragons and is engaged in correcting Luira's behavior. The trainees genuinely think their coach is amazing, as they themselves had been unable to get things moving for several years. Litia did not expect such care for herself and is sincerely grateful to her students, and everything she said earlier was actually from the heart. But the girl will simply die from overwork if her interns are fired in a year. Therefore, she suggests slowly starting to exercise 3 times a week in the evenings. Bruce considers this an ideal option and asks for permission to rely on the coach. Lydia is very pleased to hear this, as she really wants to help the students. After this, they shake hands and confirm the agreement. After some time, Lady Durna walks through the corridors of the duchy and hums a melody. She can't remember the last time she was so happy. Durna had thought about giving up Luira more than once before. She thought it would be better for her dead father's dragon. The girl is tired of the fact that Luira does not trust her and constantly shows aggression. Although the moment of injury is hard to forget, Durna can still stroke the dragon's nose. At this time, Duke Albrant is waiting for a meeting at his house. He arranged to meet with Lady Durna, who was hurrying to meet the master. The girl prepared a box for the Duke with what he asked her for. However, for the first time in a long time, Albrant sees the alchemist so pleased. At this moment, Durna tells the Duke everything that Coach Litia did for her. Now she can calmly touch her nose and does not feel any fear at all. Albrant agrees that Litia is indeed a capable trainer and asks Durna to look out the window. At that moment, she sees a trainer there who is training her trainees. The Duke explains that Litia promised to teach the students in exchange for looking after Luira. It looks like Albrant has found a truly good trainer this time. Lady Durna turns her gaze to the man and notices something odd. What she saw made her feel unbearably sad and melancholy. After all, the girl understands that the Duke still sleeps poorly at night. But the man decides to avoid this conversation and walks away. Durna then explains that sleeping pills are not recommended for long-term use. And without turning his head, Albrant replies that there is only one place where he can sleep, and it is located next to Kazan, with whom the man feels calm. It is not at all surprising that Lady Durna is worried about her master, and she would like the Duke's heart to one day be able to open up the way Luira had opened up to her. After some time, Lydia finds herself in a situation that raises a lot of questions. She came to feed the dragon and saw her employer sleeping with him. At this time, Kazan growls to make it clear that Lydia should not wake up her master. The girl agrees and promises the dragon to behave very quietly. Suddenly, the man begins to move in his sleep, and the trainer and Kazan freeze in place. Although Lydia doesn't want to admit it, the Duke is truly very handsome. If he were less severe, his beauty would be even greater. But she is not the heroine of some novel, so expecting kindness from the Duke is too much. It looks like Albrant is fast asleep, and it's time to wake him up, although I don't want to do it. Could the Duke possibly enjoy sleeping in an ordinary pen without human conditions? Suddenly, Kazan grabs the girl by the shirt and pulls her aside. At this moment, the Duke takes out his dagger and strikes it at the place where Lydia had just been. The man opens his eyes and still does not understand who is standing in front of him. Our heroine is so frightened that she can't even utter a single word. And on her neck, a cut wound from a dagger appears, from which blood oozes. Having come to his senses, Albrant cannot believe that he almost killed the coach. The girl apologizes to the Duke and explains that she simply came to feed Kazan. But all this time, Albrant looks at the girl's neck with a dagger wound. After this, he immediately grabs the coach, as he was very scared for her. He presses his hand to her wound and is about to call someone to examine the girl. The cut site begins to hurt, and Lydia tries to talk to the man. But at that moment, she notices that the Duke does not react to her words in any way. The Duke doesn't react to anything at all and is very frightened by what is happening. After this, Lydia claps her hands to bring the man back to his senses. It seems to help, and Albrant begins to understand where he is. Lydia tries to get the man to talk and asks if he has come to his senses. Our heroine comes to the conclusion that the Duke remembered something from the past. He turned so pale, as if he had seen something truly terrifying, and now Lydia has this feeling that she saw something she shouldn't have seen. So she decides to pretend she didn't notice anything at all. Suddenly, the Duke picks up the girl in his arms and is about to take her to the doctor. But Lydia tries to stop him and explains that the blood is no longer flowing. She also adds that this happens often when working with dragons. However, Albrant remains adamant and convinces Lydia that the wound needs to be treated. As her employer, he informs her that this is an order she dare not disobey. Lydia does not dare to argue after such words, but she does not understand why the Duke suddenly became so afraid for her. She only asks to be allowed to feed Kazan, but the dragon is also against this. Knowing her trainer's character, Albrant understands that even after the order, she herself will not go to the doctor. Therefore, he will personally take her to the priest to have the wound treated. If Lydia has something to say, she can discuss it now. After this, the girl asks Albrant to give her the opportunity to walk on her own 2 feet. A short time later, our heroes find themselves within the walls of the Duke's majestic home. The butler, who could not find his master anywhere, runs to meet the Duke. But Albrant asks to call the priest first, since the trainer Lydia is injured. The butler's eyes nearly popped out of his head when he saw the wound on the girl's neck. The Duke also asks to take care of food for Lydia, but she says that she is very busy today. After this, Albrant coldly informs her that it is better not to go against his orders, and the girl immediately cancels all business. Then, a series of events unfolds in which everyone begins to revolve around Lydia. In addition to a first-class priest and care, she is provided with mountains of delicious food. She can't even believe that such care was not a dream, and that all of this is real. At this moment, the butler announces that the Duke has asked me to convey something. Kazan has already been fed, and Luira is being looked after by her previous trainer. Lydia understands that Albrant wants to apologize in this way, but this is too much. Judging by the Duke's usual behavior, this incident should have been quickly forgotten. But Lydia is wrong, because Albrant blames himself very much. And next time, she should warn in advance if she wants to visit Kazan. After some time, the Duke decides to inquire why Lydia does not want to know the reason for his sleep with Kazan. At this moment, the girl begins to laugh loudly, which causes confusion in Albrant. The trainer explains that those who have ever slept with this dragon do not ask such questions. But in reality, Albrant would have had nothing to say in response to this. After all, he has another reason why he sleeps with Kazan, and warm scales have nothing to do with it. Despite everything, the Duke still cannot fully trust Lydia, and none of the previous trainers dared to approach his bedroom after the drawn sword. Albrant believes that the priest and mountains of food are more than enough after this incident, but he can't forget the face of the girl who was frightened by his behavior. However, Albrant tries to drive these useless thoughts away from himself. The next sunny day again promised our heroine a lot of work. Teaching someone is truly hard work, which requires a lot of additional material. Listening to the students' questions, Lydia realized that they still didn't know a lot. The books she brought won't be enough, so the girl decides to go to the library. Although there is no guarantee that she will find the information she needs there. Information about the physical characteristics of the Agrix dragon is also needed. It's time to start preparing Kazan for socialization and ask permission to use the library. To do this, Lydia needs to meet with the employer and mention the training. Even at the Ashar Training Center, she didn't see her boss very often. The girl feels very awkward after this morning. Albrant is interested in the books in the girl's hands, and she explains that these are materials for future coaches. The certification exam is so extensive that it is necessary to prepare for the full range of questions. Lydia decided to focus on those points that are easy to get confused about, but even this will not be enough. After this, the girl decides to ask Albrant for a favor. Many records of the Agrix dragons were lost after the death of their trainers. Therefore, Lydia wants to ask the Duke to share his knowledge. Albrant understands that she is referring to the information he acquired while raising Kazan, and our heroine is delighted that she and the Duke so quickly found a common language on this issue. However, she still doesn't understand why he took all the books from her. Lydia wasn't used to being treated this way, with people doing part of her work for her. But now there is nothing more valuable than the experience of the Duke, who raised Kazan from the moment he was in the egg. Overall, her request sounds reasonable, but Albrant still doesn't trust the girl enough. After this, the man says that he needs to think about this proposal. After all, we are talking about 10 years of his life, and he doesn't know where to start. Then, the girl decides to ask the Duke for permission to build a training enclosure for Kazan. He immediately agrees to this request and promises to give instructions to the butler. However, the trainer had previously said that the dragon should be kept with other individuals, but Lydia plans to do this after finishing her training, since now Kazan can behave unpredictably. The Duke himself knows very well that his pet has both strong likes and dislikes. Albrant agrees and explains that this is why Lydia works so hard. In response, the girl smiled sweetly, as the Duke had hit the nail on the head. This is indeed one of the main reasons why our heroine became the Duke's personal trainer. The Duke also recalls that Kazan was touched by the trainer's attempt to retrain the dragon Durna. And after this, for some reason, the girl wants to say that there are no serious changes in his dragon's behavior. However, Luira is a female and Kazan is a male, and that is why he showed tolerance towards her. After this, the Duke comes to the conclusion that his dragon likes Luira. At that moment, the dragon almost had a heart attack from such a suggestion. Of course, who would like to be accused of having feelings for someone else? Lydia watches the dragon from the side and sees such a reaction for the first time. Although Kazan denies this assumption, the coach does not understand why he would suddenly become angry. After this, the dragon finally loses his temper and expresses powerful rage. After some time, Albrant is informed that Coach Lydia is in the library. The Duke instructed the butler to monitor the girl and report everything to him. In fact, it would be foolish not to keep an eye on her, despite the fact that Kazan accepted a trainer. After all, the Duke himself still doesn't know Lydia at all and can't trust her. Therefore, every step of our heroine is carefully monitored by Albrant's servants. In a duchy like this, one cannot let one's guard down, although for now the trainer is focused exclusively on the dragons. But what if this behavior is just a trick, and Lydia is pursuing selfish goals? This possibility cannot be ruled out, as previous coaches have pretended to be harmless for years. But as soon as the Duke let his guard down for just a moment, these people showed their true faces, and if Lydia decides to deal Kazan a fatal blow, the Duke will not forgive himself. At this moment, Albrandt's reflections are interrupted by a visit from Pascal. The secretary comes into the gentleman's office and brings a pile of papers. But today, Pascal did not come alone and took his dragon with him. This is a bloodhound panther named Emerald, who amazes with his majestic appearance. Usually, Pascal's pet does not show off and exhibits restraint in behavior. Even when he pours food into the bowl, Emerald just eats it and leaves. The dragon doesn't cuddle with its owner at all, and sometimes Pascal even forgets about her existence. At this moment, Emerald approaches the man and lies down at his feet. Then she looks up at her owner and begins to purr. But Pascal just looks at his pet and doesn't know how to react. Suddenly, the Duke distracts him, and the secretary informs him of documents that need to be reviewed regularly. Albrandt looks at the pile of papers with dejection and wonders if there is anything noteworthy. Then, Pascal reports that work with dragons in the duchy has stabilized. There has also been an increase in the effectiveness of their management and the level of satisfaction among coaches. Since there is now a certified professional trainer, the situation has returned to normal. They even managed to re-educate the female Mazalid, who was the most picky among the dragons. The domestication of the wild dragons captured during the incident is also going smoothly thanks to Lithia. After all that has been said, Albrandt decides to ask the secretary whether the coach can be trusted. And is there any certainty that the girl will not betray the Duke, as the others did? Pascal understands the gentleman's concern and replies that there is no such certainty, and the Duke informs the secretary that he agrees with his opinion on this matter. After this, Pascal thinks about something in order to propose a solution to the problem. The man asks if the Duke would like him to look after Coach Lydia. After all, he just wanted to consult with her about his baby. Pascal, like the Duke, very much hopes that such a talented man will not turn out to be a traitor. And if Duke Rohannes has difficulty making a decision, he can entrust it to his secretary. Without putting off the solution to this issue for later, Pascal immediately finds Lithia. He tells her about his dragon that needs to be worked with. Pascal also wonders whether the coach will be able to find time for this in his schedule. Lithia certainly wants to help, but she finds all of this very strange. Panther bloodhounds are usually loyal to their owners and never leave them. Moreover, we are talking about such an important figure as Pascal, who is the Duke's right hand. Lithia decides to ask about it directly, since no one has had problems with such dragons before. Pascal wants to clearly show the coach the essence of the problem and calls Emerald. At this moment, a dragon appears from behind his back, the sight of which delights our heroine. It is truly impossible to take your eyes off such a majestic breed. After this, Pascal explains that he expressed himself incorrectly regarding training. The problem isn't Emerald at all, but the secretary herself and her relationship with the dragon. Now, Lydia realizes that the owner does not always understand the emotions of his pet. Emerald only opens up in private, but such moments are extremely rare. Suddenly, the dragon slowly approaches the trainer and walks around her on the right side. The girl freezes in place and pretends to be busy with her own business, while Emerald sniffs her hand. Pascal was about to intervene, but Lydia asked him not to do so. She then asks the secretary to be quiet so she can observe the situation. Pascal agrees to the trainer's request and looks closely at his dragon. At this moment, Lithia sits down on the ground next to Emerald, who is interested in her. After this, the dragon leans his muzzle against the girl's head and expresses his trust in her. The secretary is very surprised, as he did not expect Emerald to approach the coach first. Then Lydia asks if there is anything else bothering Pascal. Maybe the secretary wants to work on something specific. At this point, Pascal explains that he can hardly be called a good owner. He has been caring for his pet for many years, but their relationship is more like that of neighbors. The man simply provides the dragon with food, and Emerald protects him in return. Now everything is clear to Lydia, and first she is going to observe the animal. At this moment, a strange grin appears on Pascal's face, as if he had been waiting for this. The man explains that he would be happy to provide the coach with such an opportunity, but he will have to stay nearby for some time, and this will not interfere with the girl's work. While Pascal apologizes for putting too much strain on the coach with his request, Lydia notices a strange expression on his face. For some reason, she can't shake the bad feeling about this idea. However, the girl still makes an agreement with the secretary and shakes his hand. Some time later, Pascal is busy with paperwork in his office as usual. He remembers the moment when Lithia pretended to be busy with something else to lull Emerald's vigilance. If the Duke's fears are confirmed, Then under this pretext, the girl will try to get to the documents. This is a very good opportunity for the trainer to find out the inner secrets of the duchy. However, all this time, there was not the slightest reason for suspicion in the girl's actions. For all the time that Lytia lived in the duchy, she was only interested in dragons. Wherever her gaze turned, it invariably ended up on Emerald. After careful observation, Baskel managed to find out only one thing. Lytia doesn't really like being indoors, and it gets boring for her. At this point, Baskel decides to inquire about how the surveillance of Emerald is going. He wants to know if there are any results on this issue. To the secretary's surprise, the girl replies that she already has a ready verdict. After this, Lydia rises from the sofa to give the man a detailed report. The last time he checked the documents, everything was in place. Also, no suspicious activity was recorded on the pre-installed magical spheres. But watching Emerald should have been a great excuse to get information. So was Rohannes wrong? And at that moment, Lydia says that Baskel needs to pet the dragon every time she looks at him. Is this really all there is to it, and the girl will not continue to look for opportunities to find out secrets and obtain documents? At this time, the coach also adds that this is the only way to express his affection to Emerald. Simply put, it's like the difference between a dog and a laid-back cat. The Duke's dragon is more like a puppy and comes to you when he wants affection. But Emerald is not so open and seeks affection in a completely different way. She expresses her emotions more subtly, making them harder to catch. For example, when Emerald needs her master's attention, she pierces him with a piercing gaze. And it is absolutely normal that Baskel does not fully understand his pet. He just needs to come to terms with it and be patient. At this point, the secretary falls silent, as he is astonished by the whole situation, and Lydia asks if the owner would like to pet his pet right now. After this, Baskel silently turns his gaze to Emerald and waits for her reaction. At this time, the dragon looks intently at its master. Baskel understands that, as recommended by the trainer, now is the time to pet the pet. He extends his hand and realizes that the girl was right. He's really good at connecting with his dragon. And at this moment, Emerald is enjoying his master's strokes. After this, Lythia wonders if the dragon has become less expressive of emotions than in childhood. Baskel confirms the assumptions of the coach, whose eyes cannot be fooled. Emerald has indeed become more reserved compared to the kitten she was as a child. Now she is a truly majestic dragon, inspiring respect and difficult to communicate with. Lythia understands this, because even if Emerald calmly accepts the touch of his master, he is still a dangerous beast. He can tear a person to shreds, and trouble comes when vigilance is lost. After this, Lydia decides to ask if the secretary has time. She understands that due to his workload, he has to be indoors all the time. But sometimes it would be worth it to take a walk with Emerald in the fresh air. Lythia becomes more direct and strongly advises giving the dragon a chance to catch his breath. Baskel understands that the coach is serious, and this is no longer a recommendation, but a direct call to action. After this, not only Emerald has the opportunity to enjoy the fresh air, but the trainer herself does too. All this time, she also stayed indoors and only came out to feed Kazen. Lytia is sure that the secretary's dragon doesn't like these conditions either. After all, she should run and play, and not just be a bodyguard. Baskel also admits that due to his busy schedule, he spent little time with Emerald. In fact, this man puts his whole soul into his work, and even his earnings do not justify it. Maybe that's why Emerald doesn't demand too much and is patient. And with her gaze, the dragon shows her master not to ignore her. When Emerald lies down at your feet, it's worth petting her or giving her something to eat. And even better, if Baskel goes for a walk with the dragon, and that will be enough. Lythia also adds that it wouldn't hurt to show a little more warmth. After all, Emerald's restraint of emotions does not mean that she feels nothing. Even now, you can tell from the dragon that she is very happy to be on a walk. Baskel carefully looks at the pet's behavior and notices striking changes. Lytia once again advises the man to simply walk with Emerald and to relax in the fresh air more often himself. And the secretary notes that it was not easy for the coach to watch the dragon. After all, she also had to stay indoors all this time and only occasionally go outside. But, in any case, the girl's recommendations remain quite simple. And in fact, the problem was not with the dragon, but with the owner, who did not know how to approach her. After this, Lytia informs that the secretary can contact her at any time when questions arise. But Baskel starts laughing, which causes confusion in the coach. The man explains that Litya seems like a rather funny person to him, and first of all, he decides to apologize to the girl for his ulterior motives. In fact, Bascal asked her to train Emerald only so he could be near Lithia. Now our heroine understands that all this was done for the sake of control over her. However, it is strange that Bascal decided to talk about this so easily. The thing is that after a long period of observation, he realized that the girl had no hidden intentions. She simply loves dragons and made this her profession. After all that has been said, Lydia falls silent and becomes immersed in thought. The whole situation turned out to be quite painful and unpleasant for her. At this point, Bascal decides to tell why the Duke entrusted him with the Panther Hound. And it's not just for the dragon to ensure the secretary's safety. It turns out that Albrecht doesn't trust anyone within his duchy. Lydia should have already heard the story about an uncle named Julius Albrecht. After the betrayal, he was executed along with his wife, and that should have been the end of it. But the House of Albrecht was in serious trouble, and the aristocrats wanted to take advantage of this opportunity. After all, the title of Duke in the hands of a 12-year-old child is too tasty a morsel. Bascal understands how unpleasant it is to live under suspicion, but the Duke simply had no choice. However, Lydia does not understand why the secretary is telling all this, since she has only been here for a few months. The man explains that for an ordinary person, this time is really not enough to trust. But such people do not undertake to feed 30 dragons alone, and Lydia recalls that she just wanted to prove her abilities to those who doubted her. However, anyone with personal interests would also not waste time re-educating a complex dragon. And that's not all, since Lydia was ready to stay late at work. All this is just to prepare materials for the interns and help them pass the licensing exam. At this moment, Lydia is completely shocked, as she does not understand how Bascal knows all this. But the girl explains that a licensed trainer has a duty to help younger ones. However, even in this case, Lydia never took the opportunity to touch the important documents in Bascal's office. After all, if the coach had hidden intentions, she would have had many opportunities to carry out her plans. After this, Bascal has no reason not to trust the trainer. At this point, the secretary gets down on one knee and asks the girl for a favor. He knows that the Duke will still suspect Lydia, since it took even him years to trust her. Therefore, the man asks the girl to understand his caution. Suddenly, Lydia hears a familiar voice behind her, which is clearly unhappy about something. At this time, the Duke witnesses a strange scene in which his secretary kneels before the coach. The atmosphere around begins to get tense, and Albrecht tries to figure out what these two are doing here. Lydia and Bascal greet the gentleman, but our heroine does not understand where he came from. The girl also notices that the Duke has no intention of exchanging pleasantries with her. The Duke's gaze is so stern that even just being near him is very uncomfortable. At this moment, Lydia remembers Bascal's words about the Duke's distrust of everyone in his house. She also recalls that the secretary asked her to understand his caution. After this, the girl explains that she was training Mr. Bascal's dragon. The Duke turns his gaze to the secretary and waits for him to confirm these words. He then tells Lydia that her job doesn't seem too burdensome. At this moment, the girl begins to feel that she sensed something ominous in his words, and the Duke explains that for some reason, the trainer was too calm in increasing the number of dragons under her care. Apparently, he underestimated her capabilities too much, but Lydia tries to explain everything. Mr. Bascal's request was only for a few tips, so she agreed. However, the Duke does not understand why she was then constantly next to the secretary all week. Lydia is surprised that his lordship knows absolutely everything about her and acts so arrogantly. She has nothing to say to the Duke, although she does not feel any guilt. But Albrecht has no intention of becoming softer towards the coach. At this point, Bascal decides to intervene and asks the two to calm down. He explains that Lydia is telling the truth, and his relationship with Emerald has improved significantly. It was worth seeing the Duke's face at that moment. He was surprised by such a verdict. And Bascal adds that it is his fault that he did not report everything to Albrecht. And the secretary asks the gentleman to magnanimously close his eyes this time. The girl is surprised that she had to find herself in such a strange situation. Although she remembers Bascal's request, her emotions still get the better of her. After this, she approaches the Duke and asks him to express his complaints to her directly. After all, the man already knows that the court trainer is in charge of all the dragons belonging to the family, and caring for the dragon Bascal is also part of her direct responsibilities. Now, Litia understands what the secretary meant when he spoke about lack of confidence. But she will have to face many more injustices in the future. It sounded like she needed to drop everything and hand in her resignation right then and there. However, Bascal explains that this will not last long. This assumption raises many questions for our heroine. The whole point is that Kazan accepted his trainer, and the Duke will have nowhere to go. Lithia should imagine a life where, without suspicion, she would have to risk her own life. At these moments, a person sees a catch even in those whom he has always trusted. This is precisely what the Duke had to face, being careful about what he ate, dressed, and slept. But Bascal asks to remember that Kazan was next to his master all this time, and it was the Duke's pet who went with him through the cruel years. Thus, the Duke's entire life, except his dragon, was in doubt. It must be hard to live where a person trusts no one but animals. For Litia, this story is similar to the plot of some main character. If she had read about it in a novel, she would have simply enjoyed the content. But to think that a person actually experienced such a past is very sad. And at this time, the Duke flies in on his dragon and finds the trainer. He appears too suddenly, as Litia was immersed in her thoughts. The girl realizes that the training flight is over and interrupts her thoughts. After this, she silently stands up to begin her duties. But the Duke stops the girl to ask her a question. He is interested in Secretary Bascal's request for training and how long it will continue. Litia is very surprised and does not understand why Albrandt is interested in this. Then the girl explains that the training is generally complete. Mr. Bascal just needs to learn to praise his dragon, and the Duke explains that he was simply afraid of the emergence of new difficulties, such as with the dragon Durna. It's good that even with such a busy schedule, Lydia didn't forget to take care of the animals. But Lydia explains that the situation with Emerald could have ended very tragically. The Duke is very surprised, as this is the first time he has heard this from the coach. If Emerald had not been a bloodhound panther, and Bascal had not raised her from childhood, a disaster would have occurred. Over the past week, while watching the dragon, our heroine realized something important. Mr. Bascal has too much work and doesn't have time to pay attention to Emerald. The dragon is very devoted to its owner and considers him its parent. Only for this reason does she calmly endure his indifference towards her. However, it is unknown how much longer the dragon's patience will last. But if Mr. Bascal had more time to take care of Emerald, that would solve the problem. At this moment, the Duke's gaze and voice become too cold. The man explains that the girl is going beyond her authority, and even her status as court trainer does not give her the right to interfere in things that do not concern her. But perhaps Litia wants to give him another reason for such proposals. After all, in this situation, the coach is acting too arrogantly, and our heroine tries to understand what the Duke really means. At this moment, it finally dawns on her what Albrandt was really trying to find out. However, she replies to the Duke that she does not understand what he means. Then the man explains that he asked the girl to train the dragons and not to be distracted by anything else. From the endless hints, Litia's fist clenches tightly and her body begins to tremble. She can't believe that the Duke could actually think such a thing about her. After all, Lithia is already having a hard time coping with the care of the dragons. Therefore, she can have neither time nor desire for love affairs. She is ashamed to even imagine that she could start an affair with Bascal. And why on earth, with such a workload, could the Duke have thought that there was something between them? Litia explains that this was her first encounter with a bloodhound panther. And even just observing such a dragon turned out to be difficult due to the large amount of work. There are things that differ in perception, especially for girls. But this difference does not make our heroine happy at all, especially considering that she was hired as a dragon trainer. And as a trainer, she trained Mr. Bascal's dragon without any romantic intentions. It's even interesting whether Litia would have been accepted into the duchy if she had the additional distinction of being an orphan without a family. After this dialogue, Albrandt returns to his office, but work is currently completely out of his mind. The man even feels like he is starting to gradually go crazy. Why did he even start a conversation with Litia about his relationship with Bascal? After all, he himself knew perfectly well that the secretary wanted to control the coach. But even this realization did not calm the Duke and his emotions. Albrandt really didn't like seeing Bascal and the girl together. Perhaps he was offended by the fact that Litia was smiling during their conversation. All this seems like nonsense to a man, since such nonsense has no place in his head. Kindness is simply a poison that destroys vigilance and leads to death. How many times has it happened that the Duke trusted appearances and received a curse? But why did it really bother him that Lytia was with Pascal? At this moment, he remembers the girl's words that she is just a trainer. And as a trainer, she trained Mr. Bascal's dragon without any ulterior motives. She was not here as a woman, and would hardly have ended up in the duchy at all, being an orphan. The Duke even begins to see the ghost of the girl who utters all these words. Then, Lytia drew the line for the first time and became very angry at Albrandt's words. She has always performed her duties conscientiously and intends to continue to do so. And if the Duke has any respect for the trainer, he should no longer speak of such things. After what was said, Albrandt somehow felt relieved. He felt at peace with the fact that Lytia and Pascal were not in a relationship, and he has more and more reasons to apologize to the coach. Evening falls, and the sky is lit up by a bright pink sunset within the duchy. But even after some time, it was as if a cat had run between our heroes. Lytia didn't want to see the Duke, as only a few hours had passed since the incident. Albrandt is also sulking, and it only plays into the girl's hands that he doesn't want to talk to her. However, she does not understand where the man has such connections with the dwarves, whom she has only read about in fantasy novels. After this, Lytia meets Ukendir and tells him her name. Dwarves are short people who enjoy drinking and wear thick beards. They also show extraordinary skill and build a structure designed for Kazen's training. According to the Duke, Ukendir requires the opinion of a personal trainer for construction. However, the girl does not know how to read the drawings and asks to explain everything to her, while Albrandt evaluates her behavior. At this time, Ukendir unfolds the diagram of the building and begins his explanation. First, he plans to make a spacious cage so that the dragon doesn't feel cramped, and the door will have a triple lock so that it cannot be opened accidentally. But Lydia says that since the dwarves have taken up the matter, this will definitely not happen, and thus lifts Ukendir's spirits. However, she would add one transparent wall to surround the outside of the cage. While this will add some extra work to the build, the main goal is to introduce the dragons to each other. If there is another barrier through which animals can see each other, then that will be ideal. Instead of a separate enclosure, the girl plans to let the dragon stay here for a while and get used to it. In that case, it would be good to add magic, but then it would be very expensive. Lydia believes that spending money on expensive materials for a temporary workout is not worth it, but she didn't even think about it and decides to ask the Duke's opinion. At this moment, Albrandt approaches the girl and finds himself very close to her. Their eyes meet, and a strange feeling appears inside the Duke, and our heroine didn't expect to find herself in such a strange situation. Realizing their feelings, the two instantly jump away from each other. Albrandt decides to change the subject and ease the tension with work-related issues. He asks the girl if this cage will be useful for other dragons. And while Lytia and the Duke calmly resolve work issues, Ukendir feels sparks of love between them. After this, Albrandt gives his permission to use magic, and the dwarf supports his decision. But he didn't miss the way the two looked at each other and tried to hide their feelings. And at this moment, Lydia just wants to disappear from this place. After all, now they are alone with the Duke, and the man has no intention of leaving. Albrandt wants to talk to the trainer and resolve some issues. The man then adds that this conversation won't take much time. Lytia obediently agrees, and is even interested in what the Duke will tell her this time. After some time, they find themselves near the incredibly beautiful fountain of the duchy. Lytia and Albrandt sit down on a bench and can't seem to start a conversation. The girl was already tired of waiting and did not understand why the Duke was delaying the conversation. In the end, Lydia can't stand it anymore and decides to ask directly what Albrandt wanted to talk to her about. The Duke begins to hesitate and cannot find the words. He then says that this conversation is related to a recent incident. He would like to apologize to the coach for what he said last time. Lytia looks at her employer and can't believe that he asked for forgiveness. And the Duke explains that earlier he said words that hurt the girl. Our heroine couldn't even imagine that Albrandt would feel ashamed. However, she informs the man that he has nothing to apologize to her for. Although it was true that she felt uncomfortable, she was still only a personal trainer. So don't bow your head so easily to an employee. Lytia does not consider herself the person to whom the Duke himself should apologize. And the Duke believes that if the only trainer in the duchy is not outstanding, then his gaze is worth nothing. However, after this, the man realizes that he wanted to say something completely different. But Lydia explains that female trainers hear such words all the time. So she reflexively responded to the Duke with what she had said at the training center in response to similar accusations. And it is she who should apologize, since Lytia allowed herself to be rude to the employer. Our heroine bows and asks for forgiveness before Albrandt. The girl also asks that the Duke not bow his head before her. Moreover, it is terribly awkward to hear apologies from his lordship. Although she was hurt by Albrandt's words, she still didn't expect him to apologize to her. After all, he is a nobleman and a high-ranking person who can afford everything. Usually, aristocrats treated Lytia like a commoner. Even from Thompson, she never heard an apology after rude actions. After communicating with such an impudent person, our heroine is no longer afraid of anything. But it would be better if the Duke behaved arrogantly and domineeringly towards her. After all, Lydia doesn't know at all how to deal with such behavior, where they are ready to apologize to her. But the Duke disagrees with the girl's opinion and considers her the only trainer with a license. Besides, not every trainer can handle a dragon like Agrix. Therefore, Albrandt hopes that Lytia will still accept his apology. Familiar does not mean pleasant, and it is better for a girl to no longer remember that she is a commoner. After this, Lytia pauses to think about the Duke's words. It is enough for her that Albrandt admitted his guilt, and for that alone she is grateful. All this time, the Duke was very tense and clenched his hand into a fist. But after Lytia accepted his apology, he felt better. After all, this whole situation arose only because he couldn't control his emotions. However, Albrandt is frightened by the feelings that arise in him. At this point, Lytia decides to leave the Duke and take up lessons with the students. The man lets go of the trainer and demonstratively does not look in her direction. But as soon as Lytia moves away to a sufficient distance, he discreetly turns his gaze to her. Albrandt doesn't understand what's wrong with him and why this girl evokes strong emotions in him. During their conversation, the Duke was angered by Lytia's words about her insignificance, but as soon as she said that she was grateful for his recognition, the irritation disappeared. Maybe it's just joy that Albrandt found who he was looking for. Or is there some other reason why a man experiences such feelings? Meanwhile, a wild dragon is being trained in the duchy. Lytia watches closely as her student trains the animal to be ridden. The dragon is so resistant that Lady Dirna even begins to worry about the intern. But Lytia calms the girl and promises that everything will be all right with the young man. If the student could fall, he would have done so long ago. Training a young dragon to ride is extremely dangerous, especially since this horse has a high back. And if we were talking not about a horse, but about a dragon horse raised in the wild, then this task becomes doubly difficult. But despite the beast's stubbornness, the trainee manages to hold on tightly and cope with the animal. Such skill is not achieved solely by some piece of paper with a license. At this moment, the student, like a devoted puppy, runs up to the coach. The man is glad that Lytia has been watching him ride all this time. He even asks if he has any mistakes that need to be corrected. But the girl replies that the young man did a great job and that she herself would have fallen long ago. After this, Lytia asks to share riding techniques with her, since staying on such a beast is not at all easy. The young man replies that he is ready to start at any time for the sake of his coach. Suddenly, Lady Dirna notices something strange about Lythia's condition. At this moment, blood appears on her face and oozes from her nose. The boys are too scared that their coach has developed such an illness. And no matter how much Lytia tries to laugh off what's happening, it doesn't save her from anxiety. The rest of the students, also frightened by the coach's condition, come running to the noise. Everyone immediately surrounds the girl, and everyone tries to offer their help. Apparently, Lydia had been very busy lately, and fatigue had affected her health. Seeing how everyone is worried about her, the girl asks everyone to stop. Our heroine explains that nosebleeds are caused by overexertion, but there's no need to worry too much. In fact, everything is fine with her, and the guys can go about their business. And all her responsibilities with teaching and preparing materials have nothing to do with this. Lythia intends to continue to carry out her previous tasks and refuses the doctor. And the interns should get down to their duties and prepare food for the dragons. After everyone leaves, Lythia promises Lady Dirna to return her handkerchief after washing. But the girl asks not to worry about this and decides to look for a medicine that stops the bleeding. Lytia felt terribly awkward about the extra worries, although she didn't even feel particularly tired. However, the bleeding still doesn't stop, and it looks like she's working tirelessly. Sometime later, our heroine continues to prepare materials for her students. In a room completely filled with books, she manually copies out the necessary knowledge. Suddenly, blood starts flowing from her nose again, dripping onto the edge of the table. It would seem that over all this time, Litia had already gotten used to this. Since last week, if she exerts herself even slightly, she starts bleeding. Although it is very small, it still causes considerable discomfort. And if the Duke finds out about this, then there will definitely be more problems. It's a good thing the blood didn't drip onto the exam question papers that Litia had been preparing all night. The next exam is only in the spring, and the deadline for the deferment granted by the Duke is just around the corner. It will be difficult to find a trainer of the same level as that dragon rider, and if he receives a license and remains on the estate, it will be a huge support for the ducal house. With these thoughts, Litia herself does not notice how she crashes into Pascal. At that moment, he was just entering the library and bumped into a girl. Litia greets the secretary warmly and informs her that she is fine. Afterwards, she notices Emerald next to him, who has become much more affectionate since their last meeting. The trainer greets the dragon, and Pascal notices the girl's strange state. Litia's appearance begins to seriously frighten the Duke's secretary. On her face, you can clearly see bruises under her eyes from lack of sleep and a drop of blood from her nose. But the girl still denies feeling unwell and says that she is fine. She asks not to worry about her, since the torn mucous membrane in her nose is to blame for everything. However, Pascal explains that this is not the case and that the coach's face is very pale. At this moment, Litia feels awkward from the close distance with this man. She decides to run away abruptly and cites an urgent training session. Our heroine can't get the Duke's words about his and Pascal's possible love affair out of her head. And now, every time she meets the secretary, she has an awkward feeling. But after this run, Lydia's condition is already starting to frighten her. She stops near a steep staircase and tries to lean on the railing. She starts to feel dizzy, even though she never felt that way even in training camp. The girl looks forward and notices that everything around her is starting to swim. Is she really that tired that she needs to take a rest? At this moment, our heroine finally begins to lose consciousness. Litia falls to the floor and cannot even move or call for help. The last thing the girl tries to understand is what is really happening to her. At this time, Kazan and the Duke are peacefully resting in the promenade area. But their peaceful solitude is disturbed by one of the interns who comes to the man. The young man greets the Duke and is going to convey the necessary information to him. Albrecht lies back down on Kazan and sighs resignedly. He expected the intern much earlier, but he was still late for the meeting. At this moment, some strange alarm befalls the dragon. He suddenly jumps up from his seat and almost knocks over his owner. The Duke is surprised and does not understand what could have upset Kazan so much. But the animal's experiences in this house can only be due to one person. Sensing trouble, the Duke mounts the dragon and they take off. Kazan develops tremendous speed and rushes to save the poor girl. Meanwhile, the Duke still cannot understand what happened to his dragon. Suddenly, he notices something that explains his strange behavior. On the floor near the library, he sees Litia lying unconscious. Together with the frightened Kazan, they sit down on the ground and run up to the girl. The man picks up the trainer and tries to bring her to her senses. But the girl's body has gone completely limp and does not respond to any words. The Duke hugs poor Litia, whose face still has traces of blood on it. Albrecht is truly terrified because he doesn't know how to help his coach. At this moment, the dragon begins to roar to bring its owner to his senses. After this, the Duke finally decides to take Litia to the doctor. After some time, a commotion begins in the house, and all the doctors gather to help the girl. Litia remains unconscious and unresponsive, and the doctors begin to prepare for the examination and rush around the room. After this, one of the women, looking sad, is ready to announce the verdict. She explains that Coach Litia was very overtired and brought herself to this state. These words began to sound like an echo in Albrecht's head. It seems that the trainer was overexerting herself, and her body could not withstand such a strain. If it weren't for her base stamina, Litia would have fainted long ago. Now she needs time to recover, and it will take at least a week. However, Lydia is the only licensed trainer in the Duke's household. Replacing her won't be easy, but Albrecht doesn't see that as a problem. The trainer has only been working for a few months, and the trainees will simply continue to work as before. But the Duke also explains that as soon as Litia comes to her senses, she will want to take up her duties. So he asks the doctors to stop her, citing Albrandt's order. And if the girl still remains stubborn after this, then it's worth calling the Duke himself. That day, the entire staff saw Albrandt with such a frightened expression on his face for the first time. He knew she had a responsibility as the only licensed trainer, and yet he still said those words to her when he reproached the girl for doing too little work. It was obvious that the man had made a mistake and had not even thought about how much Litia was exhausting herself. At this moment, Kazan tries to get inside the house to find out about the coach's condition. Albrandt begins to pet the animal to calm its agitation, but he promises that everything will be fine with the coach and she will recover soon. The next day, a cool and fresh breeze begins to fill Litia's room. The girl is lying in bed and enjoying a good night's sleep. At this moment, she begins to come to her senses and feels a breath of wind. Our heroine opens her eyes and begins to look around. The ceiling seems familiar to her, and the girl remembers that she has already been in a similar situation. After this, the healer enters the room and is glad that the trainer has awakened. She reports that the girl is in the hospital of the ducal house, and his lordship found Litia unconscious. At this moment, our heroine begins to remember what happened in the last minutes of that day. Then she suddenly jumps out of bed, as she did not have time to finish important things. The girl is worried that everything is left unattended and will get mixed up if she doesn't take control. However, a strong male hand stops Litia and does not allow her to escape. Albrandt was there again and saved the girl from fainting again. But Litia continues to insist that everything has gone wrong and that she needs to at least take care of the interns. And the Duke turns to the doctor, who is sure that the girl may still be dizzy. In this state, Albrandt will not allow her to work and exhaust herself. After this, he puts Litia on the bed, so that she thinks only about rest. He wants the girl to compromise and not take the loss of consciousness so lightly. The Duke discovered that the coach had been staying late after work to help trainees prepare for exams. He also lists the rest of the work done by Litia and does not understand when she even had a chance to rest with such a schedule. Our heroine thought that she was giving herself enough time to rest, but she never expected to faint from her work. Suddenly, Kazan's huge head appears in the small window. No one expected that the big dragon would be able to squeeze into the house, but he wanted to see his coach so much that no obstacle could stop him. However, from such pressure, the hospital began to crack at the seams, as if from an earthquake. Litia understands that Kazan was very worried about her, but the doctor doesn't understand how the Duke could allow the dragon to enter the territory. But no one can break Kazan's stubbornness, especially when it comes to Litia. The girl tries to calm the dragon and says that she was simply overtired, and the doctor reminds her that if the trainer doesn't rest, her recovery may be delayed. At this time, the Duke watches with interest the scene unfolding between the dragon and Litia. After this, the doctor asks to take Kazan away before more people see him, and if the dragon presses like that, the building will simply collapse like a house of cards. After this, Litia decides to give the beast a little more of her time before saying goodbye. But this situation made her think about her health. From now on, she promises to better monitor her well-being and stress levels. She was pleased to meet Kazan, but the Duke could persuade him to stay in the enclosure. However, last time during the coach's vacation, the dragon caused chaos and no one could stop him. But at this moment, our heroine remembers another important matter. She is shocked that all her study materials have been lost. And the Duke is surprised that in such a situation, the girl continues to think about work. After this, he calms Litia down and tells her that he picked them up and handed them over to Coach Bruce. The girl doesn't seem to be getting any better, and it seems like she's about to collapse again. But nothing can be done, since Litia is the only licensed trainer. At this point, Albrandt promises that he is going to increase the number of trainers in the house. He understands the girl's concerns, but explains that this is not something to worry about. After this, the Duke leaves and asks our heroine to focus on recovery. After all, rest is also help, since the duchy needs Litia healthy and full of strength. And the girl no longer understands whether Albrandt is reassuring her or reproaching her. But in all the chaos, she didn't have time to thank him. A week later, Kazan can barely stand the separation from his coach. He is very unhappy that the Duke cannot influence this in any way. And Albrandt explains that the dragon will not be able to visit the trainer until she recovers. This makes Kazan extremely angry, but otherwise the restoration of Litia will be delayed. He has no choice but to simply wait and miss the girl. Since the Duke took over the care of the dragon again, time has become catastrophically short. It's even strange how he managed his schedule when Coach Lydia was not there. And her absence was felt not only by him, but also by Lady Durna, whose training with Luira also had to be suspended. The girl is still recovering from the injury from her dragon, and it was only thanks to Lithia that she was able to overcome it. Other training has also been stopped, and Luira has been returned to her former trainee. It felt like the support that held the entire corps up had disappeared. Coach Lithia had only been in the Duke's house for a few months, and without her, everything had returned to its former chaos in one day. The Duke is reluctant to admit that the coach's absence is very noticeable, but now the most important thing is to restore her health, even if the workload on other coaches has to be increased. After all, Lytia is the only licensed trainer in this duchy. She is also incorruptible, skilled, and has a sincere attitude towards dragons. Albrant can't forget her shining look and smile. At that moment, he catches himself thinking that he also misses the girl very much. After this, he gets to his feet and decides to visit the coach. Kazan is glad to have the opportunity to go with his master, but Albrant forbids him to do so. The man explains that if the dragon goes with him, it will only hinder the trainer. Albrant is still tormented by the thought that he actually exploited the fragile girl. Perhaps my heart will feel lighter after Lytia gets better. And if she recovers, then such thoughts will stop visiting the Duke's head. But passing by the garden, Albrant notices a strange picture. In front of him appears Lytia, who is calmly playing with the bloodhound panther. At the same time, Bascal is next to her and watches the girl with affection. Lydia feels incredibly happy and doesn't even notice the Duke. Meanwhile, he even freezes in place from bewilderment. It would seem that Bascal and the girl are deeply captivated by such a pleasant moment. But in a matter of seconds, the secretary finally notices his master. The Duke grabs Lytia by the hand and tries to find out what she is doing on the street. After all, her recovery time has not yet ended, and Lytia should be in the infirmary. Albrant does not admit that he was going to visit the coach and noticed an unpleasant sight on the way. But he still doesn't understand why the trainer is on the street. Then the upset Lytia explains that the doctor allowed her to take a walk. Our heroine doesn't understand why the Duke speaks to her so harshly every time. And although she speaks the truth, Albrant shows with his whole look that he does not trust her words. Bascal explains that no matter what the patient, sitting only indoors is harmful to health. But the Duke is confident that being near the dragons, Lythia will not be able to fully recover. However, the girl hasn't seen animals for so many days that, on the contrary, she feels better around them. She demands that Albrant not take the dragon away from her and let her enjoy her time with him in peace. After this, the Duke decides to cool his ardor and realizes that he was hasty. Then he turns to Bascal and offers to assign him escorts. And Emerald can be left with the trainer at this time so that she can fully enjoy communicating with her. However, Lythia is against this, since the dragon will not want to leave his master. Or to be more precise, she needs to watch the dragon a little longer with her owner. After this, the Duke comes to the conclusion that Lytia wants to be with Bascal. The girl agrees to this, and Albrant is already getting worked up about their romantic relationship. Burning with anger, the Duke demands that Lytia be taken back to the infirmary. And if the girl refuses this, then the duration of her stay in the hospital will have to be increased. Bascal decides to extinguish the sparks that have arisen between the heroes and explains that Lytia went outside only 10 minutes ago. However, the Duke takes his words as a refusal of the order. But the secretary puts his hand on the gentleman's shoulder and informs him that lying in bed for too long is harmful to his health. That is why the doctor allowed people to go outside to breathe fresh air. Besides, if you don't talk, no one will know what's on the Duke's mind. Therefore, Albrant should tell him directly what he wants and why he is so angry. After some time, the Duke begins working on documents in his office. He looks much calmer now than he did an hour earlier. At this moment, Bascal, who was a little late, comes to him. But the Duke doesn't even want to know the reason for his delay, and is only interested in his own errand. Then Bascal explains that finding the right trainer is very difficult. Difficulties arise particularly when verifying the origins of each candidate. But it's time to increase the number of trainers, since it's impossible to stand still forever. Thanks to Coach Lydia, they have laid the foundation, and it's time to move on. It should also be noted that the girl is truly incredibly talented. Not every licensed trainer achieves such results. Finding lithium in the training center is like finding a diamond in the desert sands. But the Duke does not require a second trainer of the same level. He just needs someone who has a license and can help Lithia. At this point, Baskel decides to ask if this is really the only issue. He already said that no one will know a man's true thoughts if they are not spoken about. But the Duke does not understand what the secretary wants to say and what he is hinting at. Then Bascal decides, as an old friend, to advise the gentleman not to dig himself a hole and to be honest. However, even after this, Albrant pretends not to understand his hints. Even Emerald was getting bored at this point with conversations that were leading nowhere. But if the Duke had said that he was worried about Coach Lydia's health, she would have accepted it. At this time, Albrant would never have come to the garden, and Bascal knew about it. Everything indicates that the Duke was deliberately looking for Lydia's trainer. However, the man explains that he is only protecting her like a diamond in the desert, and he demands that the girl be healthy for the well-being of the duchy. After this, the Duke silently approaches the window and decides to change the subject of the conversation. Among the relatively clean places is the Ashur Training Center, where Lydia worked. It is one of the centers controlled by the Empire and is relatively prosperous, even taking into account the fact that Director Ashar received bribes from Count Harris. But in this way, the Count was only helping his third son. By imperial law, training centers can graduate a limited number of trainers per year. This means there is a limit to how much the Duke can take into his house. The Duke decides to start from the center of Ashar, and at this time, the director feels a cold, which means that someone remembers him. After this, Bascal announces that he will collect all the information about Ashar's trainers. But Albrant is going to take Coach Lydia with him, and the secretary should keep this in mind. Bascal was a little taken aback by this decision, as it was not like the Duke. However, he is glad that his master treats the girl so reverently. After all, Albrant doesn't really have any particular need to take a coach with him. Bascal understands that his master is not very bold in his confessions, and the problem lies in the fact that he himself does not understand the reason for this. But it looks like this will be a tough one for Lydia's coach. At this moment, the girl also feels cold because someone remembers her. After 5 days, our heroine can finally return to her duties, and the first thing she does is rush to the pen to her favorite Kazan. After such a long separation, both of them cannot contain their emotions. The dragon congratulates Lydia on her full recovery and nuzzles her with his nose. And in between licking, the girl apologizes for not being able to come earlier. But she is very grateful to Kazan for the fact that it was he who found her unconscious that day. The dragon must have been very scared when he saw his dear person on the floor, bleeding. And even then, Kazan did not behave as usual, as he was worried all the time. So now, Lydia feels obligated to let the dragon do some mischief. At such a moment, being strict with him would be too cruel. After this, Lydia tells Kazan that they haven't flown for a long time. This is probably one of the happiest days for a dragon who has finally waited for his trainer. Lydia is also extremely excited about flying with Kazan. Now both the girl and the dragon himself feel truly free. Meanwhile, the Duke calmly watches this lovely picture from the ground. After a while, the dragon and its trainer land. And at that moment, she meets the displeased Duke in front of her again. The man asks not to forget that the coach only recently left the infirmary, and he doubts that the doctor would approve of even a short flight. Ultimately, the Duke just wants Lydia to be careful and not overexert herself. But the girl explains that she was very pleased to fly after such a break. However, the gloomy atmosphere proves that all excuses are futile. Moreover, the Duke decided to declare that he would feed Kazan himself. This is an order, and it is the same with the dragons of the Marcellid breed, for whom she is responsible. Albrant orders that feeding be entrusted to another trainer, and that only observation of the dragons be carried out. Lydia has no answer to this and offers to take Kazan to the pen. They have already flown well, and now it is time to return back. Although Lydia is very sad, she cannot go against her employer's orders. But that's not all, since the Duke didn't have time to say the most important thing. After all, he plans to go to the capital of the Empire soon. However, the girl does not understand why Albrant is telling her all this. Then, the man reminds that he recently promised to hire new trainers. This is precisely why he is going to the capital and wants to take his coach, Lydia, with him. He needs a consultant who can evaluate the trainer's abilities. The Duke also plans to take Kazan with him so that Lydia can keep an eye on him. And if time arises, the girl will be able to visit her family. Albrant will be leaving for the Empire in 2 weeks and wants Lydia to recover thoroughly during this time. It is impossible to describe Lydia's joy at such incredible news. she promises to recover as soon as possible and prepare gifts for her family. There is not a single emotion visible on the Duke's face at this moment, but he agrees that Lithia is going to get in shape and relieve him of his worries. This is where the dialogue between our heroine and Duke Albrant ends. With this attitude, time flew by quite quickly for Lydia. She tried to help the interns prepare for the exam, but was sent away. And when the girl wanted to feed the dragons, everyone stopped her in horror. But Lithia doesn't want to be treated like a crystal vessel. However, after she fainted, these words no longer meant anything. Still, the forced rest did the girl good, and she began to feel much better. Even the Duke himself appreciated her condition and was ready to go with her to the capital. But Lydia doesn't understand at all why she has to ride in the same carriage with him. Although the trainer wanted to fly with Kazan, the Duke strictly ordered her to go with him, and he doesn't want to remind her again that too little time has passed, and Lithia has not fully recovered. However, what good is the comfort of a carriage if you have to ride face-to-face with your boss? Even though this is real torture, you still can't disobey your employer's orders. Despite her disappointment, Lydia decides to focus on more important things. She notices Kazan, who is acting quite calm, although joint training has not yet begun. However, he had visited many training centers before this. The Duke's dragon must have gotten used to such frequent moves. At this moment, Lithia notices the trainees riding on dragon mounts. But the most important thing now is that Kazan is okay and reacts calmly to other animals. But Lithia feels like she has become a big problem, and traveling all the way to the capital in this situation is completely unbearable. It would be better to saddle the dragon myself and not suffocate in this carriage. After some time, the Duke decides to stretch his legs after the grueling journey. But at this moment, he turns his attention to his companion. If she was too uncomfortable, he would be ready to prepare a separate carriage for the return journey. However, looking at her peaceful sleep, the man understands that there is no need for this. Although in this position, the girl's neck should obviously hurt. This makes the Duke nervous, as he had taken special care to put Lydia in the carriage. Now the last thing she needed was for her to feel ill again from the awkward position. Suddenly, one wheel of the carriage hits a stone lying on the road. At this moment, the Duke grabs Lydia and prevents her from hitting herself. Luckily, with such a soft pillow, our heroine doesn't even think about waking up. It seems that she has now found the most comfortable sleeping position, and it is located on the chest of the Duke, who is even afraid to move. Meanwhile, Lydia presses herself ever closer to the man, without even realizing it. At this time, the Duke's heart was ready to burst out of his chest from excitement. Frightened by his own emotions, he pushes Lydia away and returns to his place. Albrant explains to the girl that the carriage hit a bump, and he helped her not to fall. Lydia thanks the man, and doesn't even suspect that she has been sleeping on his chest all this time. And the Duke asks the girl to come to her senses after sleep, since they are already approaching their destination. After this, our heroine decides to look out the window to assess the situation. Before her eyes appears a huge city in which she once lived. So much time has passed that Lydia is incredibly happy to be back in her native land. Although the Duke didn't mention which training center they were heading to, the girl already guessed everything. This is the Asher Center, where our heroine previously worked. Albrant also explains that it is not necessary to hire a coach from there. But since this place is under the direct control of the Empire, cleanliness here is a considerable advantage. Although the director here takes bribes, things are even worse in other centers. After this, Lydia decides to go first to keep an eye on Kazan. As a trainer, she asks the dragon to remain calm. Suddenly, the girl hears a familiar voice calling her by name. Ahead, she sees her friend, whom she hasn't seen for a long time. Melissa even notices that her former work colleague has noticeably lost weight. But at this moment, the boss himself appears behind the Duke's trainer. They greet Albrant and feel how the atmosphere around them has changed dramatically. The man asks to be taken to the principal, and Melissa generously agrees to help. And he orders Lydia to place Kazan in the pen and also come to the director's office. The girl watches her friend go by and is glad that she hasn't changed at all. After the trainer places Kazan in the pen, she goes to see the director, but she still doesn't understand why it was necessary to call her into the office. However, someone's loud voice makes the girl freeze in place. Our heroine will not confuse this disgusting and repulsive tone with anything. In front of her appears Thompson, who is perplexed by the meeting with Lydia, but in response, the girl reminds him that he was recently kicked out of the Asher Center. Lithia heard that he needed 6 months to recover. And did the time really fly by that quickly? And Thompson is perplexed how commoners can talk to nobles like that. Then, Lithia sarcastically apologizes for having completely forgotten that the man is now a simple nobleman, and not a trainer. At this point, Thompson finally loses his temper and starts screaming. He mocks and claims that Lithia has decided to seduce the Duke, but since the girl appeared in the center again, it means that nothing worked out with Albrant. But her manners are still disgusting, and she has more than enough insolence. At the same time, Thompson does not miss the chance to assess the figure of his opponent. He even offers her his care and promises to wean her off her obstinate nature. The man takes the girl by the waist and adds that he even likes people like her. However, Lydia replies that Count Thompson will still not receive the status of the first son. He acts like he's achieved something, but in reality, he's a complete zero. And Lithia is too good for an empty-headed idiot with only the glory of his family behind him. Therefore, she advises him to take up professional skills, and maybe then he will become some kind of person. Obviously, these words did not please the impudent Thompson at all. The man declares that Lithia has gone completely crazy and swings his hand at her. At this moment, the girl is already preparing to receive a punch in the face from him. But instead, she hears Thompson's wild scream, as if he were being cut. After this, Lydia notices that the man is standing in front of her without an arm. And opposite him stands Duke Albrant, who did not allow Thompson to hit his trainer. The girl notices that his lordship is holding a bloody sword in his hands, and the Duke is furious that some upstart dared to raise a hand against his trainer. At this moment, Lydia notices that other people have come running to the scream. One of them is Thompson's father, who is shocked by what is happening. The man realizes that his son is in danger and tries to stop the Duke, but Albrant demands that he shut his mouth, since Thompson dared to touch his personal trainer. And even though he was not around at that moment, he dared to insult his house without a twinge of conscience. If a person is not the heir of the family, then his life is not so valuable. Therefore, Thompson must pay for the insult to the Duke's honor with his death. After this, Count Harris decides to give his son a strong slap in the face. He considers him a blockhead who can't even do a proper job as a coach. Thompson has disgraced his father's house, and from that day on the Earl refuses him. But the Duke explains that renouncing his youngest son will not save him from death. After this, Count Harris falls to his knees before Albrant and asks for forgiveness. However, it seems the man does not understand that a simple apology will not get him off. Even if Thompson is expelled from the family, this does not give the Count the right to forgiveness. At this moment, the Duke takes out his sword and is about to punish Harris with it. The man begins to tremble with fear and prepares to face his death. Luckily, Lithia shouts to the Duke that she is actually okay, but Albrant explains that for him, this is a matter of noble honor. However, Thompson is now an ordinary commoner without a family, and he will experience his punishment in full on his own skin. After these words, the Duke thinks for a moment and stops the execution. Lithia is very worried and hopes that the man will listen to her. At this moment, Albrant notices her hands, which are shaking violently with fear. Something sinks in his heart and makes him doubt the decision he made. After this, the Duke puts away his sword and tells the Count that Coach Lithia is too kind. But he still doesn't intend to let Thompson get away with this situation. So he walks up to the man and kicks him in the chest. The Duke asks him to remember that he should never dare to catch Lydia's eye again. But if he finds out that Thompson has actually gotten close to her, then next time it won't be his hand that flies, but something else. After this, our heroes leave, and Lithia cannot come to her senses. She was so lost in her thoughts that she flinched at the mention of her name. The Duke decides to ask why the coach listened so calmly to all this nastiness, but Lithia didn't expect that she would ever have to answer this question. But she decides to be honest with the Duke and share her feelings. The point is that there was no need for her to start a quarrel. However, the Duke does not understand how one can tolerate such base insults, and Lydia explains that she is an ordinary commoner and does not dare to contradict a nobleman. At this point, the Duke loses his temper, as the girl must be aware of her status as a trainer of the Albrant house. Instead, she stopped him from executing the man who dared to dishonor his family. Then Lithia explains that excessive punishment can harm the family. There was no need to make enemies now, although she was pleased that the Duke had stood up for her. But even in this one must know one's limits, since the Duke cannot act solely out of emotion. Moreover, Thompson has already been expelled from the family, and for him, this is a severe punishment. He has lost his patron, and a difficult path lies ahead for him. If Thompson were talented, someone would have put up with his nasty character, but this is not the case. All this time, Lytia is silently thinking, and the Duke decides to distract her from this. The girl immediately joins the conversation and repeats that Thompson will now have a very hard time in life. But Albrecht says that he wanted to know something completely different from her. Then, Lytia reports that for an unmarried nobleman, rumors of an affair with a commoner are an unpleasant thing. And even if these were just words thrown out in irritation, for nobles, reputation is still the most important thing. However, even after these words, the Duke pretends that this is not what he is interested in at all. Did our heroine blurt out something wrong again and fail to convince the Duke of her position? After this, Lytia decides to think carefully about what else she needs to say. Finally, it occurs to her what should have been said from the very beginning. Lytia decides to thank the Duke for standing up for her. She didn't immediately realize that this should have been done much earlier. She often had unpleasant quarrels with Thompson in any situation. And now she doesn't regret stopping her boss for the sake of the Albrentov house. After this, the Duke replies that anyone in his place would be angry. After all, Thompson humiliated his home's personal trainer, who has a high status. At the same time, he dared to utter words for which anyone would pay with their life. Therefore, if Lytia really wants to thank the Duke, then she should help him choose a trainer. At this moment, the girl notices that the man's steps are accelerating, as if he is running away from her. She doesn't understand what happened and why the Duke's ears are so red. Did the man feel embarrassed after she thanked him? The rest of the time, our heroes walk in silence, and Lytia tries to comprehend what is happening. If this were a girl's romantic fantasy, it would look like a scene from a novel, but then our heroine herself would have blushed, and her heart would have beaten even faster. But if you think about it soberly, why on earth does the Duke treat her like that? After all, they have a purely business relationship, and there is no hint of sympathy. It's most likely not embarrassment, but anger that he wasted his time. Therefore, Lytia decides to find a coach as soon as possible and save herself from trouble. At this point, the Duke again distracts the girl from her thoughts to find out her opinion about the trainer. The girl replies that they need a specialist who can handle different breeds of dragons. The Duke does not yet have a solid base, and such a candidate would be the best solution. At the Ashar Training Center, there is a trainer named Melissa. She is known for her observation and takes good care of dragons. The beasts of the ducal house had become calmer, but she could help them find stability in their behavior. In general, all the trainers in this center are talented in their own way. Just because Lytia mentioned Melissa doesn't mean the others are worse. Besides, one cannot be sure that they will accept their offer. It used to be tempting, as the position of personal trainer for Dragon Agrix is not something you come across every day. However, Lydia herself initially did not want to work for the Duke. At that moment, they spot a young trainer who is examining the dragon. Lydia recognizes Rick, who has grown noticeably in his skill and handling of animals. Previously, he had been constantly attacked by Thompson, and it was very difficult for him. But now everything is different, and he began to behave much more confidently. Although his method is still imperfect, it is much better than stubbornly clinging to incorrect techniques. After this, Lytia gets the idea that this is exactly the kind of person the duchy needs. After all, the House of Albrecht must change, and in addition to increasing the number of dragons, it must also distinguish itself from other lands. Rick is now able to quickly learn techniques and has recently received his license. Therefore, Lytia is confident that the Duke will find such a person useful and that he will be able to help the interns. Meanwhile, on the outskirts of the capital, an orphanage awaits our heroine. At this moment, the children playing in the sand hear someone calling them. Turning towards the voice, they see their beloved Lytia in front of them. The children immediately throw themselves on their sister's neck, but she tries to stop them. The girl is going to tie up the dragon so that he doesn't have time to escape. After this, Lytia's hands become completely free, and now she can hug the boys to her heart's content. The children are so happy to see their sister that they knock her off her feet. All this time, they received only letters and missed the girl very much. But Lytia lures the children with good news that she has a surprise for them. After this, she asks to call the others to open the gift. While all the children ran off to get their brothers and sisters, the mother helps the girl get up from the ground. After such a long separation, Lytia is incredibly happy to see a familiar face. She doesn't even hide her emotions and the happiness she feels. At this moment, they, together with their mother, hold hands and greet each other warmly. And Mother reports that Duke Albrandt himself had previously come to them in person. But Lytia doesn't understand why her boss needed to come to her shelter. After this, our heroine decides to share that she is sad because she cannot visit her family often. However, her mother reassures her, as this is quite normal in adulthood. When a person leaves his native nest, sadness is a completely natural phenomenon. At this moment, Lydia takes something out of her backpack and wants to give it to her mother. It turns out to be a bag filled with money earned in Albrandt's house. Lydia explains that the shelter is short of a lot of things, and this amount should help a little. But it is obvious that Mother is not at all happy with such a generous gift. She asks not to worry about the shelter and does not accept the girl's gift. But Lydia says that she wants to help somehow, and she has nowhere to spend this money. However, the mother remains adamant and asks to invest this money in the one who earned it. At this point, Lydia falls to the ground and starts screaming that she will donate this amount somewhere else. After all, as soon as she put them in the bag, they no longer belong to her. The mother calls her ward stubborn and does not understand who she was born with. However, she is still against taking this money. The whole point is that during his visit, the Duke made another donation. Lydia can't believe that such a stern boss did this. He had previously donated money to the shelter so that the girl would agree to leave and become his coach. Mother also tells Lydia that her boss praised her work, but she still can't stop thinking about why the Duke made a donation to an orphanage that wasn't his property. Maybe it was just a good deed on his part, because altruists still exist. At this moment, the mother notices that something is seriously bothering her charge, and Lydia explains that she simply didn't expect such a conversation today. Then the mother decides to calm the girl down and asks her not to worry. She doesn't know why the Duke decided to support the orphanage, but it was a kind act on his part. But Lydia is probably worried because she is not sure of the sincerity of Albrandt's motives. After all, he had already deceived her once when signing a work contract. Although this cannot be called a deception, since the Duke clearly had no malicious intent. At this moment, the mother, with extraordinary warmth, takes the girl's hands and calls her by name. She explains that if the donation could harm the children in the orphanage in any way, she would not have accepted it. She, of course, regrets that she cannot give them more, but the mother would not put the children in danger either. Now Lydia finally understands why the abbess went to the duchy, but the mother asks the girl not to think about this and leave adult matters to adults. At this point, Lydia begins to protest and declares that she is already grown up. However, for any mother, her child will always remain a child, even if he is not her biological child. This means that Lydia will always remain her beloved daughter and pride. The mother hugs her charge and asks her to continue doing what she loves so much. At this time, the Duke settled into a room where he could take a break from everything that had happened. He had enough time to put his thoughts in order. At this moment, Lydia appears in his office, inquiring about the progress of the search for a trainer. The girl also brought freshly brewed tea with her and reports that, thanks to the Duke, she was able to spend time peacefully. After this, Albrandt explains that after several days of observation, he wants to take all the coaches. But by law, you can only take 2, and the Duke already has someone in mind. The man really liked Melissa, who was recommended by Lydia, and has already accepted the offer. Now there is only one man left, and the Duke is counting on his coach's advice. Although Albrandt chooses the trainers himself, Lydia's opinion may still influence this. That's why she doesn't forget to mention Coach Rick, whom she recently noticed. But the young man didn't stand out in any way, and his work experience was short. However, Lydia is sure that this is precisely why he is so suitable for them. Although Rick is a qualified trainer, he still does not have his own method. Hiring an experienced instructor may also be an option, but finding one is very rare. And if any of these people are left without a permanent job, there are personal reasons for this, and Rick will be able to develop in accordance with the rules of the duchy. After the Duke listens carefully to the girl's opinion, he promises her to think about her proposal. At this point, Lydia begins to nervously scratch her palm as she gathers the courage to speak. After a short time, she finally decides to break the silence and turns to the man. But for now, the girl is not yet ready to get straight to the heart of the matter. Albrandt even feels sympathy for the coach, seeing her anxiety. However, at the same moment, he becomes serious so as not to show his weakness. And Latia explains that she has a very personal and important conversation, but the Duke is surprised because the girl had never asked to talk alone before. However, now it is important for her to hear the answer to the question of caring for the shelter. But instead of asking a question, Lydia thanks her employer for his help. The Duke is very surprised and decides to see the trainer's reaction. After all, his donation was made without her knowledge, and he had no plans to tell her about it. However, although Lydia thanked him for this, her face still somehow expressed sadness. After this, Albrand explains that he has already seen this shelter once. That's why the man decided to help, when during his second visit, he saw that nothing much had changed. In this regard, the Duke asks the girl not to thank him for this act. But he also understands that the trainer is interested in something completely different. At this moment, an awkward pause hangs in the room between our heroes. Lydia is surprised at how easily the Duke can read people. After this, Albrand explains that the girl simply misunderstood everything. In fact, he values the trainer very much and treats her accordingly. At this moment, the girl turns red as a boiled lobster and jumps up in indignation. She never expected that the stern Duke would say such touching words to her. But the man explains that in his home, she showed results that exceeded his expectations. And in fact, he wants Lydia to work for him as long as possible. Now the girl understands that she will have to bury her bones in the duchy. After this conversation, Albrand decides to take a look at Rick with his own eyes. And Lydia burns with shame, as she reproaches herself for thinking about the Duke's bad motives. Although the boss is also good, since you shouldn't speak in riddles all the time. The day comes when Lydia's mission ends, and she heads back to the duchy. On the road, she has enough time to think about what happened. She can't believe that the Duke has changed so much for the better. But his final choice was Melissa and Rick, who were recommended by Lydia. They are amazed by the girl's ability to train an Agrix dragon in just a few months. But Lydia explains that right now, Kazan is simply not attacking, but is not perceiving the whole situation normally. Melissa agrees that there is still a lot of work to be done, as a suppressed beast will explode sooner or later. The boys have already spent enough time on the road and will arrive at the duchy very soon. Lydia has given them instructions in advance, and Rick and Melissa are ready to earn recognition. The trainer is very pleased to see that the boys humbly accept their position as trainees. However, we still shouldn't let our guard down and will need to keep an eye on them. After some time, the carriage with its escort approaches the gates and drives into the duchy. Now, Lydia is responsible for all trainers and considers it important to improve relationships between students and graduates. So 2 weeks pass after Rick and Melissa arrived at the duchy. With the arrival of new staff, our heroine has more time to deepen her knowledge of Agrix dragons. But the biggest problem is that there is simply no material on these animals. Bruce explains that a whole century has passed without the Agrix dragons being bred. Previously, the recordings were transmitted through personal trainers, but now they have all died and the materials have been lost. But Agrix is a very special breed, and searching for information about them blindly is not at all easy. Lydia had counted on a lot, but 100 years is quite a long time. It is even possible that the records of these dragons were encrypted or abbreviated. With this hope, the girl searched the entire library, but found nothing. It seems that the only information available now is her own notes. But the problem is that she only has information about Kazan, and it is unknown whether it will work on other Agrix dragons. At this moment, our heroine cannot stand it any longer, and in anger, crumples the piece of paper in her hand. Bruce sensed the coach's mood and even shuddered a little in horror. The girl is really angry that some guy destroyed all the documents and records about the Agrix. Luckily, at that moment, someone enters the library, and Lydia's rage disappears. The Duke appears before her, ready to begin their joint training. However, he sees a picture of a pile of books and records scattered around the library. Another surprise for the Duke is that Lydia is not yet ready for training. Albrand understands that all this is not simple and asks if there are any problems, but Lydia reassures the Duke and informs him that her health is fine. However, there is indeed something that has been bothering her a lot lately. After all, she wants to carry out the merger as carefully as possible, since no trainer will be able to hold back the clash of the Agrixes. At this point, the Duke offers his assistance and promises to oversee the process. Although he can't vouch for the other dragons, there will definitely be no problems with Kazan. The Duke's control would indeed be useful, but Lydia decides to leave it as a last resort. It's a tempting offer, but Kazan needs to become a little more independent. After this, Lydia decides to ask if anything happened during the flight today. Albrant didn't expect such a question and replies that there is no need to worry. However, Lydia does not believe that the boss came to her only because he was interested in training. After all, he could have sent someone else and not wasted his time. At this point, Bruce decides to find out what exactly is preventing the unification. Lydia would like to say everything directly and refers to her intuition. The girl feels that Kazan has not yet reached the stage of an adult dragon. However, she cannot say this out loud in front of other students, so as not to upset anyone. So Lydia replies that she just wants to be extremely careful, and that she feels like Kazan is missing something. After this, she leaves to continue training the Duke's dragon, or Lady Durna. Bruce has no choice but to accept this and get on with his other duties. At this time, training flights for trainees are in full swing, and Lydia walks Kazan and thinks about the behavior of dragons. At first glance, they appear calm and reliable. You wouldn't even guess that they had to endure so many difficulties. All this time, Lydia was thinking out loud, and someone overheard her monologue. It turned out to be the Duke again, who has a knack for sneaking up unnoticed. After this, the man decides to ask what Lydia was looking for so diligently in the library. The girl explains that she hoped to find information about the Agrix breed there, but everything turned out to be in vain. Unfortunately, she was once again convinced that the recordings had been lost after the death of the trainers. At this moment, Kazan approaches the Duke, and this makes Lydia think about something. Since they returned to the duchy, she began to see Albrant often. Did he really have a lot of free time for this? After some time, it is deep night, but Lydia still decides to spend this time studying literature. The girl does not lose hope that she will be able to find at least some mention of Agrix dragons. However, all her efforts prove futile and hopeless. It would be nice to turn to experience with other species, but there is no one who has studied each species separately. But it is also impossible to simply postpone training in joint housing. Moreover, the Duke does not miss the opportunity to visit the coach several times a day. Judging by his behavior, he comes because he is looking forward to this training. Therefore, Lydia decides to spend a couple more days looking for materials. But if nothing is found, then you will have to start training and exercise extreme caution. Suddenly, she comes across a book that feels different from all the others. Lydia goes through all the materials again and finds something that clearly piques her interest. The title is quite ordinary, but the book cover seems somehow scaly. After this, the girl opens it and notices another oddity. This book has a culinary title, but for some reason, it doesn't even have a table of contents. Moreover, it feels and looks very different, and this reminds our heroine of something. Finally, Lydia remembers where she might have heard about this before. This book is made from Cririon skin, which has camouflage abilities, and this ability is maintained even without magical energy. For this reason, dragons of this species were constantly hunted, but this is now prohibited throughout the continent. Lydia had also heard that Cririon skin was used to make cloaks or book covers to hide secret documents. And since such a book ended up in her hands, it means they clearly wanted to hide something here. After this, Lydia first of all decides to go to the Duke. Albrant does not yet understand the seriousness of the situation and asks to leave the necessary documents on the table. However, Lydia explains that she has a serious conversation. The Duke is surprised that this is not the first time the coach has asked to speak privately. At this moment, our heroine hands him an unusual book, but the man doesn't understand why he needs materials with culinary recipes. However, Lydia asks him to first open this book and look inside. After this, the Duke carefully examines the contents and also discovers something strange. This book seems completely different to him in appearance and touch. Lydia reports that she found it in the library completely by accident. At this point, Albrant decides that they should call Lady Durna. He also expresses his gratitude to Lydia and promises to give her a worthy reward. But the girl is outraged. She did all this not for the sake of reward. However, the Duke explains that she has found a very valuable book, and while the content hasn't been confirmed yet, Lydia deserves a reward for her efforts. After this, he decides to ask if the girl has time to get enough sleep. But our heroine has no answer to such a provocative question. To avoid creating problems for herself, she thanks the Duke for his concern. Albrant exhales resignedly, as if he knows that Lydia still doesn't allow herself to rest. Meanwhile, Lydia was driven to blush, as the man's gaze seemed too tender to her. After this, Lady Dirna comes into the office and begins to analyze the book. She explains that the notes were made with specially treated ink. The girl realized how the content was hidden and asked to give her time to prepare. After this, she draws a magic circle on the floor, which will help decipher the book. Then Dirna activates the magic, and the book begins to transform. Instead of the previous title about culinary recipes, it now has a title about dragons like Agrix. After deciphering, Dirna hands the book over to Duke Albrandt. The man is surprised that it has such a simple name. However, the writing inside turned out to be completely unreadable to humans. Dirna explains that this is done in order to react to a special magical energy. It must be the energy of the Agrix type, without which it will be impossible to know the content. At this time, Litia is walking Kazan, and is very surprised that the Duke decided to visit her again. Our heroine thinks that Albrandt came to fly on a dragon, but the man explains that he is here now for another reason, and even upsets Kazan with this. After this, the Duke approaches his dragon and begins to look him straight in the eyes. The man then leans his head against his and begins to exchange energy. Suddenly, Lethia and Lady Dirna are illuminated by a bright light from the magic that has occurred. At this time, Albrandt opens the book to look at the contents again. What he saw seemed very interesting to him, as he managed to decipher the secret recordings. After this, he asks Coach Lethia to take a look at the contents. The Duke is confident that this will be of great help to his trainer. Lethia takes the book with interest and feels as if some secret is about to be revealed to her. She can't believe she's finally found records of the Agrix dragons. This is an extremely rare species, which is chosen only by representatives of the ducal house of Albrandt. Therefore, knowledge about it is passed down from generation to generation. To preserve these records, the descendants used ink from the worn-out scales of Agrix and the skins of the Cririon clan. The author also states that he sincerely hopes that the information will reach future generations. At this moment, Albrandt notices his coach's genuine interest and awe in this book, and she can't even believe that she was allowed to read this. But the Duke explains that she is the one responsible for Kazan, and therefore she needs to know this. The only thing Albrandt asks is that the recordings not be shown to anyone else, as they are extremely valuable. However, the man did not expect that his coach would be so grateful to him for trusting him with this information. He is so touched by this situation that he can hardly contain his emotions. Lethia notices this and is surprised that the Duke can even make such an expression. Suddenly, the girl notices something strange and reports it to Albrandt. She explains that she felt something very unusual, and judging by this book, the Duke's dragon has not yet reached its adult form. After some time, Kazan is resting peacefully in a new enclosure built for him. Now he is absolutely alone, and it seems that he is even a little bored. At this moment, the trainers are closely watching the dragon through a telescope. Lethia and Melissa settled down near the enclosure in some small thickets. After observing Kazan, the trainee hands the telescope to the trainer. Lethia looks closely to see the dragon's behavior. The Duke's pet still lies motionless in its place and shows no reaction. At this time, there are dragon mounts next to him, to which Kazan also pays no attention, and Melissa wonders why Lethia is in such a hurry to train together. After all, before this, she constantly put it off and said that she needed to be more careful. In fact, the difference between a dragon's young and adult form is very important. Therefore, the sooner Kazan's training can begin, the better. But if you wait until the adult form, the situation may become more complicated. Dragons that choose a human usually remain in their juvenile form unless their master helps them complete their maturation. Of course, it all depends on the situation, and sometimes the best option is to leave the dragon in its young form. But in Kazan's case, independent decisions cannot be made and all the records must be studied first. After much deliberation, Lydia decided to speed up this process, but she decides not to tell Melissa about the book, and she simply decides to rely on her coach. Lethia is so happy with her reaction that she can't help but say how glad she is that her friend has arrived. But at that moment, they are both distracted by a loud noise in the training pen. The girls notice that all the dragon mounts have scattered in different directions. Meanwhile, Kazan still lies motionless in his place. After observing the dragon, Lethia is ready to make an interesting conclusion. Kazan wasn't just cold to the other individuals, he simply ignored them. When Lethia went to the capital, the relationship between Agrix and the dragon mounts seemed quite tolerable, and just as Lethia was starting to talk about the problem again, the Duke suddenly appeared behind her. She was very frightened by his sudden visit, and even fell off her feet. Albrand also notices Kazen's strange behavior, and believes that it is because he was locked in the pen. But Lydia thinks that until now, the dragon horses have been insignificant to the Agrics. Most likely, he simply ignored their existence. The Duke understands this difference, but does not see it as particularly important. Then, Lydia gives him the example of a stone that a person hits on the road. Such a stone is either ignored or removed from the path. And for Kazen, the dragon horses are now the very stones that are best pushed aside. Therefore, he must learn to perceive them not as a hindrance, but as beings worth accepting. If he doesn't even recognize the jumping dragons, then there will be even more problems with the other specimens. And this must be overcome, even if it takes a long time. Lythia thinks it would be a good idea to use some calming herbs. At this moment, the Duke gets up from the ground and asks the trainer to wait a little. She seems to be terrified by the thought of what the Duke is about to do now. And at that moment, the man actually goes straight to the pen. Lythia tries to stop him, as it could be dangerous. But at that very second, she notices an amazing sight and freezes. Albrandt's mere presence frightens all the dragon mounts. After this, he calmly approaches Kazen, who is protected by transparent glass. They start talking about something, and the dragon starts grimacing. After this, the Duke leaves, and Kazen continues to lie in place with a dissatisfied expression on his face. Returning, Albrandt reports that from tomorrow, the dragon should become more obedient. Lythia is curious to know what the Duke told Kazen, but the man is not revealing his secrets. After all, the main thing is not what he said, but whether the dragon will listen to the trainer. However, Lydia doesn't understand why Kazen would need a coach if he starts to understand everything at a glance.